This meeting is a public work session where the board will hear a variety of reports and have discussion regarding topics which may be scheduled for official action at a future meeting. Remember, that's a key word tonight, for a future meeting. During this meeting, we will not be voting or making the final decision on any topic. Questions and comments by members of the audience will be limited to those topics on the agenda for this meeting. Please remember that it's limited to topics on the agenda, only on the agenda for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being videotaped for community cable channels. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania Sunshine Law, it's necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To assure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the board come to the microphone and state their name along with their address. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to no more than 3 minutes. This limit will permit time for all of those who wish to speak to the board. Whenever members of the audience exceed this time limit, the board president may ask the individual to yield the microphone to the next speaker. That concludes my part that I'm going to read. Now I'm going to improvise a little bit. I'm going to ask the audience and all board members to turn to the next page to our agenda. I'll make a few comments about the agenda, and I'm going to, as board president, I'm going to readjust the agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about funding Penndale's completion. Then we will move, and board members will at that time be able to make comments and ask questions. Then we will move on to the high school addition concept, and board members will be able to make comments and ask questions. Then we will move on to school makeup days. And again, board members will be able to make comments and ask questions. When we are finished with those 3 topics, we will then open it to the audience of citizens for questions and comments regarding to those 3 items on the agenda. Once we conclude that portion of tonight's meeting, we will then move on to secondary education, and we will discuss those 3 items listed below: the teaming and honors program of studies and boundaries. And when the board members are finished asking questions and making comments on those 3 items, we will then open it again to the audience of citizens to make comments or ask questions about those items. In saying that, I will now turn tonight's agenda over to, I believe, Mr. Dennis Kelly in Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Clements. I tried to provide for the board and the public a concise explanation of where we are with our bond funding. As I stated, on June 1st of 1992, that was the last new money the board actually borrowed through bond issues. That amount was $25,830,000. At that time, one of the 2 main projects of that bond issue would be major additions and alterations to Pembroke and Penfield. I was not here at the time. There was some type of change in board philosophy, and those additions were never done. What was agreed upon was that this money would then fund the building of Bridle Path and Walton Farm. When those projects were going on during that time, during 1993, the board also decided to go ahead with a second facility for a high school. In order to do that, they brought in Dager & Dager, a local real estate firm, and charged them with finding parcels that would accommodate that size facility in the North Penn School District. What the board finally agreed upon was a parcel of 136 acres on Keenest Road in Montgomery Township. At that time, there was no money budgeted to purchase this land, and the board agreed that they would take the money that was in surplus in the bond issue that had not been spent yet for any other projects and buy the land with that money. At that time, they said in a future bond issue, if and when the second facility was ever built, that money would be folded into a bond issue to more or less repay the money spent at that time. I've tried to show you on there exactly what we've spent for the land, which totals $6,503,971. Since that time, the current board of directors has decided to cancel the second high school, and the Penndale project, which was originally budgeted at $16 million, has been brought down through ART to $15 million, of which $14 million has already been issued in contracts to vendors. I showed here as of June 30th, and if you check your audit report, this will agree with the figures listed in the audit report. There were bond funds of $12,412,548. Since that time, over the past 6 months, up to and including the December expenditures, there was $6,263,054, which gives us a current available fund of $149,494. In working with Art, we've come up with encumbered funds of $10,880,000 that'll be needed to complete the projects already underway. That leaves us with a deficit of $4,730,506. If you remember about 2 months ago or 3 months ago, one of the board meetings, I had projected that I thought, even though PFM thought we'd only need about $2 or $3 million, I thought it would be about $5 million due to working with Art and knowing the other expenditures that were going out at the time. Currently, over the past 6 months, as you can see, we've been averaging about $1 million a month in expenditures to contractors who are doing work at the Pendale project. By May of 1996, if we continue in that vein, we'll be out of money. At this point, there are three, and I've given you three options. Either issue additional bonds to consider the immediate sale of the Keenest Road property, or to commit now to increase the 96-97 budget, and which at that time we'd have to delay payment to contractors till after July 1. There's also a number of other projects, and I imagine Art could probably speak to them, that are not included in these encumbered funds that were listed to the board on prior reports. This money will just really be spent to finish basically the Pendale project and some other minor renovations at Brook and Field. There are my recommendations for your discussion.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I'd like to open it for discussion. I think we'll start over on this side. Whoever would like to go first, have questions or comments of Dennis. Go ahead. David?
All right, I'll start. Dennis, if we were to consider the third of the three options that you had there, last year's budget included monies that were paid out in settlements of assessment reassessments.
Yes.
Approximately how much money was that?
That was almost $1.8 million.
So that was nowhere near the amount of money that we need at this point without a tax increase for item number 3. I don't have any other questions right now.
Okay. Questions or comments from this side?
I'm just curious what the minor renovations planned for at Pembroke and Penfield are, please.
Yeah, we had reduced that considerably, and we're still carrying $1.4 million at Brook and $1.1 million at Penfield. And that was actually funds that have been set aside in this overall bond issue for upgrades that we have carried out on pretty much a regular basis. Most of them to date have not been that large in scope. We've replaced partitions in lavatories. We've replaced some doors. We still have fire doors that need to be replaced. We still have the renovation of both auditoriums that need to be completed. We have some exterior doors that have to be replaced. And we had talked about doing some renovations in the office areas. This number is not cast in concrete at this moment. It's a number that we had reduced from the original. I think originally we had $4 million plus, Dennis?
Yes, it was.
And at each building, and we reduced that to this remaining number. I don't expect that what we need to do in those buildings, depending on what this board decides to do, I think our principals would be quick to tell us that we ought to think about upgrading some of the science facilities now that we're going to be putting ninth graders back in those buildings. But it certainly will be your option and your decision as to what you want to do at Brook and Field.
Two questions, Dennis. If we were to delay payment, would there be a penalty?
That's something we could work out with the contractors, but more than likely, we would be some type of penalty. Either that or they would probably stop
would-
working, because they have to
Yeah.
pay their employees at the same time.
I've tried to get some kind of a feel on that, and most of them have assured me that they would stop work. And I'm not too sure, and our solicitor could answer this, there was new legislation as it relates to payment of contractors on jobs, and I'm not sure of where that is. or-
That did not pass yet,
Okay.
but the legislation was in there, things that bills were to be paid within 30 days, or an interest charge would be assessed.
Okay, and what is the very latest you would need an answer from this board?
The very latest, I would need an answer by March. It takes 2 months. If your option is to go with a bond, it takes 2 months really to set that up, and I would need to know by March so we could have everything in operation in May.
By March 1st, then?
I would like it by
March
March
action
1st.
Which would be a February action meeting. You need,
Correct.
or do you mean a March action meeting?
No, I would like it by the February action meeting so we could start things rolling in March.
And what if we want to go RFPs because we have lost confidence in PFM or
I would
bond counsel?
prefer if you told me that now, and I would get those out on the street as soon as possible.
Okay,
I
consider,
I have copies of an RFP that could go out.
I think we should consider it told if they're, and seek the feelings of other board members, but I know that's something I've said for a long time. As we consider, if this board or 5 board members would consider seeking more bond money, I think we need to also take into consideration at the same time possible borrowing needed for our portion of whatever may happen at the VOTEC school.
I was going to remind you of that. There's also another situation, Mrs. Mangle. I think Fred will be coming to the board with recommendations on buses. So, I mean, there's another angle that you might want to consider.
Okay, so there's a much larger financial picture than we're getting
I
tonight.
would not come with a recommendation to put buses on a bond issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
But let's go back and revisit the VOTEC. We know the VOTEC number, don't we?
No, but the VOTEC,
Well, it should be from what I've been told, it's between $5 and $6 million, which our portion would probably be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million.
which the
About half of
VOTEC
what-
board at this time has not come in with the solid numbers or a final decision from that board, which would then be brought back to the home boards. And at that time, we have a presentation that will come
It's
from Michael
supposed to
Irwin
come in February.
And
Yes.
also, each school will have the opportunity to finance their portion as they wish. There are some school districts that want to just tax outright, pay it, and be done with it. There's some that want to borrow on a 3-year, they want to borrow on a 5-year. So there's going to be flexibility between schools, and the VOTEC is going to seek what possible options would be available to provide to each of the school districts. Question. Art, you were talking about additional projects not shown, that were shown on prior bond reports that were not put into this report. Have you mentioned all of them, or are there some
No,
still
I have
outstanding you should have
not. There's
mentioned?
still, we have a cooling tower storage tank that has to be done at Hatfield in the amount of $4,500. We still have the driveway realignment at AM Culp, which was part of our overall agreement with Hatfield Township as it relates to the modulars we added. That's $20,000. We have talked for many years about the problem at Oak Park as it relates to window walls and doors and the fact that youngsters go outside to go from classroom to classroom, and we've always carried $325,000 in the budget for that project. We still owe the HVAC contractor at Walton Farm because we have not made final acceptance of the system. We're holding $30,000 there. The 1.471800, $1,471,800 for Pembroke, $1,186,200 for Penn Field, and we also have the remainder of the work at Penndale, which you folks are aware of, and Lansdale Square. We have always carried $10,000 for land acquisition.
So essentially, in the past, when bonds were requested and passed by past boards, these are some of the reasons why they were passed, for this type of work. And so these funds have been spent on other things other than what they were secured for. That's not encouraging. Okay, also, Mr. Kelly, I would appreciate copies of the bills for the real estate fee from Dager and Dager. I want to see what that bill looks like. I also like to see Potash's legal fees of $14,160 and how that was laid out for the work that was done to that point. And also, I'd like to see the settlement sheet from that bond issue.
That's fine. I'll have that for you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Any more questions from this side? Okay, moving over here, Mr. Schilling.
Yeah, the bond, the term, what is it, 20-year bonds?
20 years.
Can we go 10 or 50, what's the,
You can, yes, you can go into, if you would opt to go 10 years or 30 years.
okay.
Anything else? Okay, Vicki?
Dennis, I understand what you were saying when you were referring to this bond with Penfield and Pembroke and the expansion that was there. However, you have right now out of here committed $3 million for each of those projects, partial work which has already been accomplished, correct?
Say that again, Mrs.
Out of the
Sherman.
1992 bond that you're referencing here.
Yes.
That was actually, my understanding was actually taken out for two $3 million renovation projects at Penfield and Pembroke, correct?
I thought it was closer to $4 million.
$4 million, and these are the remaining
These are the
balances of
remaining
those, of that work. And you have or have not included that in the encumbered funds?
We've included in the encumbered funds those items that are left that Art sees a need for over at those buildings. I mean, he could speak better to those needs.
Okay. I would like to see a total of what you anticipate within the next, I think, at least the next 3 years in borrowing needs as it stands right now, as best you, Art, and the rest of the administration can assess our facility upgrades and anything else that would be related, VOTEC, to our borrowing needs, and come together with a more solid number that brings everything together for us. As far as the project that you referenced in which we borrowed, which wasn't acted upon, I was here for that as a member of the audience. It was not the 1990 bond, as we just said, that was for $3 or $4 million renovations. It was actually for 220 classroom additions to both schools. It involved a $14.7 million bond indebtedness that came through collectively on something like a $27.5 million bond issue of the 1990 A series.
Correct. That was.
It went through to the very point of an Act 34 hearing in which those funds were designated for borrowing. However, the project died when the transition took place from Dr. Rhodes to Dr. Elko. Following that Act 34 hearing, the project was killed. And many members of the community were glad that such an expensive project didn't go forward. However, the borrowing wasn't refunded, and it wasn't returned. I believe this just emphasizes an important need that as we look forward to further bond borrowing, I would like to reiterate my request that we seek an independent audit for detailed systems analysis, one that would bring us not only a general accounting procedure book, but also that would provide us with a project-by-project accounting of our past borrowing and where those funds have gone. We have right now $107 million?
114.
Pardon me?
114.
$114 million in outstanding debt. And am I to assume that there is no other money available within that indebtedness to
That's
transfer
correct.
to this project?
That's correct. One thing I would like to suggest to Mr. Clements and the board is that in the future, when we're doing a bond issue, that we always include some type of budget. One of the problems that I've run into since I've come here is in trying to answer many of your questions, I can go back and look at the prospectus, and what it says is what the bond issue was borrowed for. However, there's never been any prices associated with those renovations. So it was hard to go back and say, this is, the bond million was 25.8 million, which was made up of this, and this, and there was nothing like that. I think in the future, we should insist that included in there is what we're projecting to spend on each of these projects.
I agree with you 100%. The point is, though, there was an Act 34 hearing, and that bond, at the time it was taken, was justified by a previous board as being for that expansive renovation project. had that money been at least saved for major construction, it wouldn't have been a 1992 bond paying for Penndale. It would have been that 1990 borrowing fund that would have paid for it. And I have a hard time understanding exactly where all the monies that have been borrowed since 1990 is probably our latest bond issue.
The 92, it was the 90A and then the 1992.
The oldest
last
active
two.
bond issue that's
Yes.
involved in this $114,000
Is the 1990, the $27 million bond.
isn't since 1990. So right now, we have a long-term commitment in paying off the debt that we have. So I'd also like to see consideration that in the future, that before any bonds are let, that we make sure we don't extend beyond secured funding. I know sometimes emergency situations can cause a need for it to be tapped into, but if we were in a different position, we could look at fine-tuning the project that exists at Penndale, but since the bids have been let, we're pretty much committed to those contractors for what's been done. All I can say is that I hope that we can get some clearer details on what we're going to need to borrow, how we should proceed, and a little bit of advisement as to how we can avoid the situations that are occurring now from past actions. And that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Bill, Don? Comments?
I just reiterate, I think, what's already been said here. Before I could make a, I think it's obvious that we're going to have a bond issue. We got to pay for what we've obligated ourselves to do, and we're going to have to do that. And the only reasonable way to do that is the bond route. And what has been said by Mrs. Scheer and Mrs. Mengel, I concur with. But I guess what I'm saying, the bottom line is, we talk about $4 million or $5 million here, and you mentioned some other things. I'd like to know what all the numbers are and what the total bond is thing over the next 3 years, so I know what we're paying for this time and what the total bond issue should be.
That's fine, Mr. Hill. That's
Okay.
what we'll do as soon as you as a board decide where we're going with expansion. We can put some
I
price
think we're gonna
tags
have
to
to
it.
break that, I think as a single board member, I think we're gonna have to break that down. I think that I concur with Don that we're gonna have to get a bond, okay? But I don't think that bond is gonna be in regards to whatever we do at the high school, or whatever the option is for the future. I think we've gotta get our bills paid, and we've gotta get them paid by this summer. So unless somebody else totally disagrees, I can't see how we can put it all in one bond.
Tom?
I know Bill hasn't had a chance to speak, but if I can just add something to that. Dennis, you've given us 3 options. Is there any short-term option that would allow us to finish the renovation with the understanding that we will have some sort of expansion to the high school, and that we will have other bond issues facing us so that we can get this all done in one, so we can take advantage of whatever fees there are for the generation of bonds? Is there a short-term solution to getting the project finished?
To be honest, not really, without bankrupting the general fund. I mean, we will have a small fund balance, but the fund balance I'm projecting is only 2.2 million, which is nowhere near the 4.7 that we really need.
Let's come back to, I think Mrs. Scheer had a comment, and then we'll come back to Don.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
No,
just...
and then Vicki, then Bill, then we'll come back to Don.
Okay, this is related to an alternative that, it refers to an outstanding request I have made, and I'd like to know if there's been any action taken on it, and that was for appraisals of our vacant properties. That deals with the Lansdale Square site. Even though it may not be totally complete, appraisers can give you a dollar figure under different conditions that could
What would the
exist, and the
benefit of
Keenest
that
Road,
be? To get
and the
us-
Keenest Road site.
But still, would that benefit be to go back to Dennis as a form of collateral, to go out and get some type of loan other than a bond? Would that be?
For possible sale.
Yeah, but we can't sell the property before we have to pay our bills before realistically, we're gonna have to pay the bills to Penndale before we would get a buyer for either of the properties.
But it would be a process that would have to be initiated, and if it is a collateral, at least the bond can be taken out with the understanding that it would be repaid, and that it was a short term.
Right, short-term bond as opposed to a long-term bond.
Dennis? Oh, wait, let's come back to Bill and then to Donna. Bill, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah,
One of the things that I think that we're pointing out to ourselves here is something that I've spoken of before, and that's the district, the board, should consider starting a capital fund as a budget item. And every year, money goes into that for the long-term projects, the emergency roofs, the things that we traditionally spend extra monies because we need bonds. And it's something that I would like us to have considered in the next budget and discuss the issue and make a commitment to it or not a commitment. But we constantly run into these items of long-term capital projects, and we don't have the money, so we need $4,000. If we have been putting $1 million away for the last 10 years, or whatever we decide to do or talk about, we can avoid a lot of these small, short-term emergencies, and also save the monies that you spend getting bonds and paying the interest. The other thing that we have to consider, which is, I think, been brought up, but not every bond has to be 20 years. And Fred mentioned buses. Well, if a bus lasts 8 to 10 years, get an 8 to 10 year bond if that's the way to do it, and make it a more fair way to pay for it. But we always seem to think right away 20 years for a bond. Let's think other alternatives to bond length. Same thing for the vote tech. However we decide, you don't have to go 20 years on a bond. Thank you.
Good.
I think whatever we decide is going to require financial creativity that isn't going to be brought forth by this board. It's going to require the RFP going out quickly, and that other firms that do that sort of work bring that to our attention. David is right. Could there possibly be a short-term situation? What I fear is that there's going to be a few hops here to accommodate everything that's on the plate that's been left over from the past. In the past, having already spent monies that should have been used on these projects. And when that happens, when those kind of mistakes are made, the only people that benefit are those that live on fees. And we've been clipped by churned out fees for too long. And there's got to be a way that somehow we can umbrella a situation, meet the short-term needs, but umbrella something so that we're not being hit by these people for fees every single move.
Right.
And we shouldn't be moving that often. There should be a more comprehensive plan.
Well, we'll get that
And a
RFP
commitment,
out and
whether it
see.
needs to be legally written and stipulated to by this board, that monies won't be spent anymore on things that they were not borrowed for. I mean, it's a moral obligation. So I think an RFP for not only a financial management firm to come forward with some creative ideas for us as part of their presentation, we will also need new bond counsel.
Bond counsel. I have.
Okay, is there, I'd like, Pat.
Vicki, you're saying the board approved the bond, you had Act 34 hearings, and then the money came forth and someone, for lack of a better word, or some people, spent it on other things.
And the community rejoiced because they didn't get the additions, but they didn't look to see that the money didn't reduce the debt.
Practice, if a board approved a bond for a specific purpose, what gave anyone else the right other than the board to change, the purpose for that money was why it was borrowed?
In a sense, it
I'm
was
concerned that if it's
Bill-
happened in the past, how are we gonna stop this in the future? Because the debt is just mounting, the interest is mounting.
I have to turn it to Dennis. I mean,
Right.
Dennis should have a handle on that as well as anyone.
The board made, any decisions on anything that was spent, Mr. Mosey, was made by the board at that
After they
time.
borrowed the money for another purpose.
That's correct.
Okay.
Pat, do you understand the advantage that it
I was
brought
under
to
the
them?
impression that it was done without the board's approval.
No, the point is that it was very nice to be able to go through with 3 or 4 or 5 mil increases while you mortgaged off the future of the district.
Sounds like that's.
And by the time the debt hits home, which is today and tomorrow, we're being faced with dilemmas. Bill has an excellent idea. The problem we're going to have to face is that we're at our maximum debt service payments. We are already taxing this community 29 mils approximately each year just to pay the debt service on this borrowing. To now start a capital fund, we will be elevating it perhaps another 4 mils while we're still at our maximum, trying to catch up. So,
Well, we have to catch up.
but what
That's
what
the
I'm
bottom
talking
line.
about is you're going to snowpile on some major
Right, but
expenses.
there's nothing we can do about the past. We have to correct
No.
it now.
Well, I
think,
agree with David and with Donna, then we ought to look at perhaps shorter term bonds, and we're gonna have to find someone who's very creative. these RFPs, because it's gotta stop here.
All right,
This thing can't keep snowballing.
Is there consensus then for under other business for Thursday night that we bring it up for a vote to authorize Dennis to proceed ahead, RFP for creative bond counseling and financing? We all know that we need at least $5 million. We probably need more than that. Is there consensus that we do that for Thursday night?
That's my recommendation.
I would also like to see if maybe Dennis could give us an exact figure of everything we need, so we know exactly where we have to go. The $5 million to me is just putting out a fire.
Authorizing the
6 months, we're gonna have
Yes.
another problem, and then it's another bond or another expenditure. Now, let's get all this thing out on the table, and let's get it resolved once and for all. Let us know what our expenses are, what we have to do, and let us make some kind of a decision on this nonsense.
Well, I agree with you. I
Because
think,
I hate this piecemealing stuff.
I agree with you. I think the only exception to that is, I don't think you can give us the information on the expansion. We're talking about the high school, that's,
That is a separate issue, but I'm
Right,
talking
okay.
about,
He
you
was
know,
concerned
Art
about
has a
that.
whole list of things here, which I think
Right.
maybe we should have a copy of.
Well, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Bill had to say. I am in a complete agreement that we do need to establish a capital fund. In the past, we've purchased boilers, we've repaired roofs, we've repaired canopies of buildings, and in my opinion, all of that type of work should have been done out of a capital fund, capital repair fund, and hopefully we can get something started in that direction in the budget for repairs such as that. Art, the blue book that you sent along with the original plan con that was going to go for the second high school included many repairs to not only the middle schools, but also elementary schools, and I'm almost sure I saw boilers in some for some of the elementary schools.
That would be reflected in a 5-year plan.
Right. So that's what we're going to do.
Dennis, do you have any concept or idea of how interest rates are now on bonds?
Right now, they're about 5.2%.
Can I just?
All right, but we have a busy night, let's wrap it up.
Consensus on moving forward with the RFP. I would like to see it go out as soon as possible. However, I'd like to see us bring on our general counsel and move forward. I would hope that that wouldn't create an extended delay in moving forward, but perhaps give us some of the guidance as we go forward with our other professional services that we would need. So that would be my only reason for asking that we delay this, unless we are prepared at that time.
Right. Well, I'll let you discuss, as finance liaison, I'll let you discuss that with Dennis, come forward, and perhaps you could come forward with something on Thursday night as a recommendation. We could put it in an addendum for Thursday night.
I'd also like to ask the board if they have any recommendations or firms that they would like the RFP to be sent to please let me know.
Yes. David, yeah, David did ask for one more
other
comment.
thing, if you could, number one, is there such a thing as a short-term note to the tune of $5 million?
That we can investigate and see. I don't think that is the norm in school districts, but we can certainly investigate that by Thursday.
On a $5 million short-term?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the board on this particular item?
I would like Art to include those science labs in that project. I mean, I've seen Penfield and Pembroke's construction funds tapped so many times for so many years. That is important.
Well, I think
So
I've
please
heard
include
clearly
that.
from the board tonight that,
That's
and anyone speak up if they disagree with me, that we'd like to see Art coming forward with those types of items. Let's get those out on the table and what you foresee on repairs being needed and things like science labs, that we understand clearly where the money will be going to. Any other comments? Okay. Let's move on to our high school addition concept. I'll turn it over to Dr. Bose.
Are we doing public comment by topic today?
Mr. Anderson, at the beginning of the meeting, I made a comment that we will break the public comment into two parts. We're going to do the funding of Penndale's completion, which we just completed. We're going to do the high school addition concept. We're going to do school makeup days. Then we will have public comment. Since it's on those three topics. Then we will move on to secondary ed, and we will have comments again after that. It's a heavy agenda tonight, and I thought that would be the fairest way to do it. So I think now, again, we should move on to the facilities, buildings, grounds, high school addition concept. Dr. Bode.
Well, Mr. President and members of the board and our guests, I hope this is not anticlimactic. I know you've given up a good television night because you thought this would be exciting or entertaining. I don't expect it will be either one. Hopefully it will be informative. Actually, I think common sense would dictate in a community that demonstrated that it did not care to consider a second high school, and where board members ran on that platform, as well as indicating that whatever would be approved in the form of relief must cost considerably less. It does not take a rocket scientist to come up with, I think, what is a logical conclusion. And I suspect that what I'm about to present has been a logical conclusion drawn by a great number of folks, not merely the superintendent of schools. But let me tell you about this idea. It's a concept. Some people are expecting a full set of plans developed by an architect, which is not the case. The way we're going to resolve the problem with growing enrollments and their impact on North Penn High School is to start with an idea that the board will accept, and then followed by an authorization to employ the services of an architect who, along with our own experts, individuals such as Dr. Vaughn and Mr. Wood, will work with an architect with the idea and develop it into a plan from which cost projections and timelines and other critical parts of the planning process would evolve and answer those questions that many curious folks surely will have. Not considering that at this point, but considering an idea, let me proceed to suggest that we have a growing enrollment problem, and I know we've quarreled in the past about enrollment projections, so I'm not using enrollment projections. I'm using the demographic evidence that already exists in the form of nearly 3,200 first, second, and third graders. They're now with us. They're growing up every day. They're learning what they need to be high school students, and someday, as close as 9 years from now, they're all going to be in high school. Approximately 3,200. Now, those are the first, second, and third graders we now count and have counted with our official enrollment taking the 10th day of school in September. That does not include those that may join us as new residents when their mothers and fathers buy a new home from among all those residential family units now being planned on the books yet to be constructed. So I think it's safe to conclude, based on demographics and not on enrollment projections, that the kids are here that are going to require a larger high school facility than what we now have. So I'm suggesting that the board consider, and our community consider, the concept of a separate classroom unit. You may call it an addition, except it has some distinct differences from what we would traditionally call an addition to a school. It takes into consideration the problems that we now know exist at North Penn with the current enrollment, which will be exacerbated with a growing enrollment. Certain passageways between the pods that are too narrow for an enrollment, the size that we currently have, or the capacity that we expect to be met in a few years, and the fact that for so many kids, there are personal problems created by the size of the school, the distance between their classes, and their locker location. You will find, upon visiting North Penn High School today, that many kids visit their locker only twice a day, the beginning of school and at the end of school, if they have time to catch their bus. And many kids carry a full pack of books on their back and carry their coats, which adds to the bulk of humanity that tries to traverse some of those passageways during the time permitted between periods. Now, I note that only because we should all be concerned as adults about the safety conditions that creates, or perhaps the lack of safe conditions that creates. Ordinarily, kids are wise and prudent enough to make it work. However, as the enrollments increase, it may become unworkable, or in an emergency situation, it could be quite unsafe. And you only have to see those hallways between those pods, those connecting points, to understand what I'm talking about, as I've seen them, and I visited them along with Dr. Bond as we looked at the practical problems that current facility presents. So the concept is, build a standalone facility of traditional classrooms that could house approximately 800 students that would be connected to but be separate and apart from the current facility. And so the relief granted by that simple concept is merely to displace some of the students from the current facility in a facility where all subjects could be taught, and the Board of Education would be able to manage the cost of that facility by determining what its occupancy rate would be. And at this point, looking at, in 9 years, a student body of approximately 3,200 kids, I'm projecting a classroom unit, addition, separate learning environment for approximately 800 kids. And again, the cost of that is going to be determined by the number of kids for which it is designed and the square footage that we allow for that facility as we plan it. The advantages are obvious. We maintain North Penn as a one high school community. We will encounter construction costs considerably less than building the second high school. And we will preserve the traditions that people in North Penn have evidently given high priority, that are connected with one high school, and not divide the community into two high school camps. So we're talking about a unique, separate addition. We're talking about investing considerably less money because we will control the cost by controlling the number of students for which it is designed, as well as the number of square footage for those students. If the board is able to make a timely decision to pursue this idea from its idea to a plan concept, we may be able to open the doors before we have 3,200 kids enrolled at North Penn High School. The construction would be at greater ease than remodeling the existing high school. If anybody has ever lived through the remodeling of a school in operation, as we have at Penndale, we know you have to make certain sacrifices and make certain restrictions on the traffic flow and the general use of the facility. Penndale's a big enough school, we've been able to do that. You can't say that about North Penn. So building a separate standalone addition enables us to operate North Penn as we now know it, without all the inconvenience, the dirt, and the disruption that a remodeling project would require. We will also have to consider where we locate that wing or that standalone classroom unit, and that will impact on the site itself, obviously, which will require that we consider whether or not it's appropriate to acquire additional acreage to offset the loss of acreage that will be dedicated to a new building site. That has to be considered as well. Before I go on much more and talk about the concept and its advantages, I will invite Dr. Bond, whom I consider the premier expert on how North Penn operates for obvious reasons. In addition to his talent, his training, and his skill, he's lived there day in and day out for the past 9 years. And Dr. Bond will talk to us about why we have a need now to take action. Dr. Bond.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. I have been high school principal for 9 years. For 9 years, there's 2 people at this table that have been involved literally with this topic. There's another person at this table that was involved originally that is back at this table 9 years later. I came to North Penn High School as a high school principal. I was asked to create a plan for expansion. We created an expansion plan that was denied. We created a task force. That task force came up with a plan for a second high school that was denied. Along the way, we've created a number of options, none of which have been acted upon. We've discussed and argued PEL projections. We've argued capacity at the high school. We've had a tremendous number of arguments. For me, having lived this for 9 years, I say to you very clearly that we need to make a decision. I would think that a second high school in a perfect world is the answer. We don't live in that perfect world. We don't have the kind of monies to expend to do that. This board has said no to that. I accept that. I accept that unequivocally. I believe that we have to be rid of that notion. I believe very strongly that we have to agree that there's a number of students that can safely fit into North Penn High School. I suggest that number is 2,700. We get arguments over whether it's 26 or 28. Whether it's 26, 27, or 28, we must agree on a number, we must agree on a plan, and we must do something now. I submit to you that that plan should be more than a plan just to have an addition for 800 students. There are things that we need to do now as we proceed towards 3,500 students. As a matter of fact, we changed the administrative structure at the high school last year to deal with the growing population. Starting second semester, we will be dealing with piloting trafficking patterns to deal with the population. We must do things at my level to deal with the traffic, to deal with the population, and we need to do something as a community, as a board, in the broader picture. I want this community, I want this board to understand that I'm a realist. I believe that we've got to get past all that we've been through, and we've got to move forward, and I hope that people will understand that there are still as many concepts probably as there are people in this room. I don't believe that anyone in this room is incapable of creating a concept to deal with 800 students. My hope is, my prayer is, that we will agree that something has to be done, that we will vote on it, and that we will be moving it forward, because if we do not begin moving this forward, we are going to lose youngsters. And when I say lose youngsters, I'm talking about socially, I'm talking about emotionally, and most importantly, I'm talking about academically. We have youngsters right now who are missing the bus because they can't get from A to B because the snow's on the ground. We're going to deal with that, and we will continue to do so. Give us the resources, give us the permission, and we will make whatever you say work as best we can. So my hope is that we'll listen to what Art has to say relative to a time frame, and then we will vote on this thing and move forward. That's my hope.
Thank you. Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood has been asked to do some estimating and project what a reasonable timeline might be like if we act in the near future and pursue development of this plan or a variation of it. Mr. Wood?
The board is now receiving copies of a projected time frame. Having built a few schools and having lived through the process from the time of the appointment of the architect to the occupancy, this is my projected time frame. I think ultimately it will work. If you look at it, it requires, if we want to occupy, and you can always back into a time frame, if you want to occupy by September of 1999, you can see the benchmarks and the times that we need to meet. We're looking at a March 96 appointment of an architect. We're looking June 96 to submit project justification and schematic plans. We're looking at cost estimates in September of 96. We're looking at design development drawings in October of 96, coupled with an Act 34 hearing. In June of 97, between October 96 and June of 97, that is the time that is required to develop construction documents. The actual documents, the documents that you will review on a regular basis, the documents that will determine the types of finishes and materials, and we're talking initially about a 4-story building, and that makes good sense from a land utilization standpoint, and also from an operational standpoint. We're looking, following the construction documents released for bids in July of 97. We would receive bids in August of 97, award contracts in September of 97, commence construction October 97, and hopefully have substantial completion by July of 99. In all of my discussions with Dr. Bond, he is very quick to say, ideally, it's nice to open a building in September when you start a new school year. But he also realizes that if we would spill over for some unknown reason, we can occupy in January, we can occupy in November. The danger with not meeting somewhat of a time frame as it's projected here is that if you don't start now, the work that's involved in all of our approvals, we're talking labor and industry, we're talking every approvable imaginable, township cooperation, land development plan, who knows, probably an archaeological survey. It goes on and on and on. And those things have to be happening if we expect to occupy in September of 99. That allows us a 23-month construction window. And that sounds like a considerable amount of time when you think that we did Walton Farm in 12 months and Bridal in 14 months. That was new construction, standalone, out in the middle of a vacant field. That's a consideration. We know that if we're going to move some playing fields, we should be doing that very early on. They need 2 years to mature before you can use them. We also know that this building is somewhat more sophisticated than an elementary building. And that's why we put some extra time in for a building of this nature. But this is my projected time frame, my professional opinion, having been there a few times, and I would certainly be willing to answer questions if you have them regarding this.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Let me begin to recap before we take the questions. What we're proposing simply is a unit with some degree of separation from the current facility to make the ease of construction less disruptive. And we're talking about a unit that would accommodate approximately 800 students connecting to the existing high school. This unit should contain regular classrooms, science labs, computer labs, administrative offices, instructional planning centers, cafeteria, kitchen, and other facilities which will be required as the final plans are developed. We expect it will cost considerably less than the second high school. That to be determined again by the number of students and the number of square footage, and decisions to be made by the Board of Education. And let me suggest some other advantages to this concept. We preserve the traditions of North Penn High School, and we do not split the community into two high school camps, and that does happen in two high school communities. We maintain control of the costs by determining the number of students this facility would accommodate. We maintain all the existing courses and even increase our likelihood of adding additional courses because of the size of the student body. At the same time, we can maintain the same academic standard because we have one high school unit that is establishing, maintaining, and sustaining that standard. The teaching staff will continue to be a unified team without a division over splitting the talent and debating whether or not that was a fair split. The student body is kept intact, and the traditional programs in athletics, fine arts, and the practical arts, which are items for which this community has been proud, will remain the tradition of this community. The inclusion of the cafeteria in the kitchen addresses the problems we already are encountering and feeding the student body presently at North Penn High School. And furthermore, we will maximize the operating and staff efficiency and the economy of both through controlling related costs because of the obvious. One high school administration, one support staff, one head librarian, one set of department chairmen, and so on and so forth, that would conceivably be doubled in a two high school approach. So if this is the preference of our community, it's doable, and it's doable in a reasonable amount of time. It would be a large high school, certainly. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to that, and the thing that makes a large high school work is a concentrated effort to try to provide a niche for every child. That can be done. I've seen it done elsewhere. I've been involved in doing it elsewhere. It can be done in North Penn. This is a kind of community that can make it work. It takes an attitude and a dedication on our part, and some tough decisions by the Board of Education. Mr. President, that's the end of our presentation. We'll take the questions.
Thank you. I think we'll start on this side with questions. Whoever would like to go first. John?
Regarding the four-story building, is it possible to do 3 stories? And because we're not sure what type of, we're talking 600, 800 students. The 4th floor could be roughed out until a later time. Is that a consideration?
It's a possibility. We say multiple stories because there's economy in construction.
Mr. Chair?
Okay. Dr. Bose, I agree with you that the biggest handicap of the expansion proposal that we brought forward would have been the disruption that occurs with expansion. And that isn't something we should take lightly. However, there was also the benefit of utilizing those core facilities which would still be available, dealing with minimal expansion or appropriate expansion tailored towards common use by the whole population.
Right.
And as I look at the numbers, and I agree, I expect us to peak and have pretty consistently felt that this community's high school population would probably peak out between 3,100 to 3,200 as opposed to 34. We're going to say 32 is right there sitting between us, or right around that ballpark. That would mean classes of about 1,000, 1,050 students to 1,200. The separate building would involve, I guess, a self-contained building to accommodate 800, which doesn't match up with a grade level. Is it going to be designated for a certain course of curriculum? I get the feeling not. It's going to provide all levels of classroom. Would there be a band room? What would we be duplicating on a smaller scale within this, or what your general idea would be? Everything?
That remains to be determined as we plan and as we weigh the advantages of duplication of certain facilities, or even conceivably something as new, for instance, as a small theater for a growing, very talented group of kids who have already won awards nationwide in theater arts. So, Mrs. Scheer, I'm not avoiding your question, but I'm saying that we maintain the flexibility as we approve the design to include or exclude items based upon either the desire to see something like a small theater, or maybe a 300-seat theater developed, and/or we want to manage the costs. So it's conceivable that if we wanted to add to that 800, you could even say it is a wing for a certain class, but that adds more capacity than we probably need, and
Right,
adds to the
exactly.
cost.
And that's why I wondered, when it's not incorporated, when it doesn't come together with the building for a free flow of total redesignation of the use according to the classroom needs, that we involve ourselves in that. I would say the one advantage of the expansion that goes up against weighing the disruption that does take place was that the plan that was brought forward did bring classrooms on board a year following the start of construction. A lot of this was never brought forward because the expansion plans never had serious discussion. So there was an advantage of not having to wait for full completion of the project in order to introduce classroom space. There was a scope and sequence that not only brought classrooms on board in stages, it also addressed the circulation of the school, which with or without another building still remains poorly designed, if you ask me, for those students that are placed there. It also addressed many of the things that were included in a feasibility study. $10 million of needed upgrades. Now, it didn't address every one of them, but it did incorporate within the cost of the expansion those upgrades, which will remain on the table to be resolved with a separate building. So these are the areas that I like to see as we weigh this, which is the best way to go, the consideration of the positives. I do believe the $30 million price tag of the expansion project was a bit exaggerated. My suggestion, had there been enough influence in the board at the time it was up for discussion, would have been to bring together a committee made up of professionals that would volunteer their time and help refine the plans that were paid for by this board and the community as a whole. Whether we go forward and there's a consensus to go in your direction or in ours, I would like to see that achieved. We have architects, we have engineers, we have people in professional trades who make a living and a good living selling their professional services to other school districts and other businesses that I know would be willing to volunteer without a commission attached to the work they do in order to provide that community input in a very appropriate and relevant way. And so that I'd like to see as we go forward too. I just like a little bit more of the direction that you're heading in. I understand with the architect, there is a possibility that up at the state, a self-contained building plan may exist, and in the state of Pennsylvania, all architect plans paid for by taxpayer dollars become the property of each and every government entity within the state. I know adjustments might have to be made, but you may find something that is an 800 or perhaps even 1,000 that just needs a few modifications. A plan up there to begin with in Harrisburg, and we could look for our Citizens Committee to help us review that, see what adjustments are made, and then on an hourly basis, an architect without a commission assigned to it, but rather through billable hours, help us adjust that to our site and see then what our cost factors would be without involving hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into an architect's
I agree
commitment.
with you. I think that this concept could be the subject of discussion without fee or cost from those who have the expertise and who would estimate what it might cost if we choose to pursue development of a plan.
You have to understand my concern. This community has seen so many dollars put out, whether it was the $14.7 million Pembroke project. It was complete with architect's plans. No one even knows exactly how many dollars were committed to that when it was pulled off the table. We've had the high school and the expansion, second high school and expansion. I'd like to see if we could pursue this in a timely way without a huge commitment of funds as we've seen in the past. And with that, I could support at least investigation of it.
Bill?
No?
Don?
I think the concept's good. I think the idea of building onto the school up at the high school, which is the direction obviously we have to go, and doing that in a separate building and trying to keep the construction away from the main building as much as possible. I think during that same period of time, though, I think as Mrs. Scheer brought up and has been discussed in the past, there are modifications that have to be done to the basic high school, and they ought to be considered at the same time.
Sure.
And that will improve maybe enrollment, improve classroom facilities, and give more space up there. That could be done in parallel with that, which would be construction at the high school, that had to be done regardless. And I think that ought to be considered at the same time. So from my position right now, I think that we've wasted enough time here. I'm not encouraging to do any more studies, or I think we've studied this to death, and I think that the community has pretty much told us they want us to build at this high school, and I just concur that we ought to move along, probably along this time frame.
Tom?
Bill?
You just passed it. I'm sorry. I like the idea that the separate building, and one of my concerns has always been, and we've learned it watching Penndale get renovated, that you really do disturb what's going on in the classrooms. Again, we all know our fortunate situation there. We had classrooms to give up on an alternating basis, which we don't have at the high school, so a separate building makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't want to get into nitty-gritty details right now because we really don't have any, but what I would like us to do is to proceed using this concept as our starting point and work within what the concept is. And as Don said, we got to move on. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come over. Start with Donna.
Okay, first of all, Dr. Bond, I'd just like to say that I thought your comments were most eloquent, and what I liked the most was that you're pretty courageous, and counting on you to, you're here at the right time for what we're about to do and what we're about to take on. Your influence at the high school is undeniable. Your ability to control that many children and that many members of faculty. And so I'd just like to say what I think has been a part of what great and mighty things have happened at the VOTEC has been for three reasons. That board there cooperated and still does to this date. There is good, strong legal counsel and professional services provided at that school district that can be relied upon, and it is provided equally to all members of that JOC. And third, there's a can-do attitude in Michael Irwin, and I think that's why we're seeing great things at the VOTEC. And I see that happening here, and I think that a lot of that is not only because we have made some changes here on this board, but also because you were there, and still with the high school, and some of the administration here also. I think this election has, the only thing I heard during the whole election were three things in regards to accommodating space in this community. Second high school, which the community soundly defeated. Expansion in one form or another, and the Penmont plan. What I'm requesting is that Penmont plan, which came off as a dark horse opportunity or an option, it intrigued many people in the community, of which I am one. I never thought at any time to forsake John Fisher's effort in the Penmont plan, and what I'd like to see happen is that be placed on the agenda soon at some time, and let the community and the rest of the board know where that has come. With John Fisher and some of the doubts that he has on how that would have fleshed out, but I believe Penmont has to be addressed because that was an open-ended question left from this election. I don't want it just to be ignored, and if that could be done swiftly at a night for public consumption, I'd appreciate it. Also, I appreciate too, like Bill Allen already mentioned, the separate unit. I don't see any real genius, and all due respect, I don't see any real genius in that idea, but it was good common sense. And I think as we move forward with whatever design this expansion will take, whatever it appears to be, will be driven by program, by curriculum, and that it have common sense. And so I'm encouraged, and I believe that this board is going to move more quickly and expedite, unlike any board in the past. I want to assure you of that because I know you're tired of waiting. So, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Bond, for your comments tonight. I appreciate them as well. I'm sure that it has been most frustrating over the last 9 years to go through all the changes that this growth question has presented you to deal with. In regards to the expansion plan that you alluded to in your opening comments, could you please explain to me, in your opinion, why that expansion plan was denied by the then city board?
I don't know. Someone that may have been on the board that time may be able to. I don't know why. I don't know. I can't answer the question. I don't know.
Okay. Are those plans, Dr. Bose, still on file here in
Mrs.
this
Krieger, let
room?
me tell you what the problem now is with those plans. And I agree with many of the things that Mrs. Scher said, but the concern that I have is that when we were talking expansion, we had 2,150 students up to 2,200 students at the high school. When we start this project, we're going to have 2,700 students at the high school. That's a difference of 500 students and makes a difference in the kind of plan or expansion that you can use. When we talked about the expansion program, we had 3 lunches at the high school. Now we have 4 lunches. We start lunch at 10:15 and we end at 1:35. The problem with the expansion piece now is that we don't have the luxury of a Penndale where we can move students about. By the time we start this project, we will be fully housed, and that's the difference and the concern that I have with what I thought was a good plan at that time, which is why I mentioned in my comments that it's a different day and a different time. Just remember, 500 additional students, and that creates major problems with the expansion.
Who was that one, 1989? Was that after the long-range plan of 1989? No one was on this board at that time.
Okay.
You forget how quickly we turn over.
In regards to your concept, Dr. Bose, I would like to take a further look at this as a board member. My only concern is the need for a separate kitchen, cafeteria, and a faculty dining room. I would be more inclined to take a look at expanding those current facilities that we now have and making them better and more up to date. Anybody that has recently visited the students' cafeteria is clearly aware of the many repairs that are needed in that room. The kitchen could really use a renovation as well. So that was really my only concern with this concept, was the need for a separate eating facilities and food preparation facility. And it left me with a feeling that you were ultimately going to house either one grade level and it'd be too big.
It's too small for one grade level.
Or one or two course offerings.
But we don't want to begin to feed the kids at 9:30 and before they go on the bus either.
Well,
Which is
yes.
why we consider additional cafeteria facilities in the standalone building.
Yeah, but by 1999, we're going to be close to our peak.
Right.
I mean,
That's my
we're going to be
concern.
close to our peak and
Well, we'll certainly consider improvements to the existing building, especially those that we can do quickly and provide immediate improvement. Dr. Bond will tell you, in this, the blizzard of '96 was a good example, that many of the kids get from one pod to another by cutting through the courtyard. If we had a walkway, a covered hallway, for instance, kids could move quicker and with less congestion, avoiding some of the pod connections by crossing the courtyard where the sidewalks in the past now are. That could be, for instance, relatively simply accomplished in a summer project that doesn't disrupt or doesn't displace students or classes because the school year is operating. And we might be able to consider those kinds of things as we look at what we might want to do and how much we might want to spend for improvements as well.
Is there any reason why we have to wait until March? I know it's only March. Do you mean March's action, meaning you want a decision on who to appoint?
If you're gonna do if we're gonna do an RFP and go through the interview process, that's gonna be a tough date to meet. I mean, I really will start tomorrow doing an RFP, whether I use it or not, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, the timeframe to proceed and get an RFP on the street, get it back, have you folks work through it. First, have you review the RFP before it goes out, send it out, and then review it, look at it when it comes back. It's really a tight schedule for March of '96.
David?
Dr. Bose, in light of the fact that any option that I was previously in favor of has been rejected, and in light of the fact that all the options that remain are completely unacceptable to me, I will support this concept and would recommend to the board that we move ahead with this as quickly as we possibly can.
Pat?
I have a couple. I thought we voted against the second high school last month. We were talking about building a high school on Keenest Road that was going to house 1,200 students. Now we're talking about building a 4-story building that's going to hold 800 students. Well, we're pretty close to what we were going to do on Keenest Road. I don't know.
I think when you see the figures, they'll be considerably different.
Well, I would have to see that because,
My property.
I only see 400 less students, and now I see a 4-story building. I think the original proposal was for a 2-story building on Keenest Road. Is that 4 stories? Excuse me. Also, I understand that there were some plans or something done a few years ago about expansions or renovations.
Just this past February.
I mean, and here we are now in January, the middle of January, and we have 6 weeks. We have to make a decision. If I remember correctly, weren't all the PEL studies presented by those in favor of the second high school? Weren't we talking the year 2004, 2005? All of a sudden, now we're up to the year 2000. I have questions, Mr. President. I think we need a little more time on this one.
Any other comments, Pat?
That's it.
Okay. I'd like to conclude because I think we're obviously going to need more discussion on this. I agree with Dr. Bond. I feel the number at the high school is 2,700. That's the number that this board member has accepted as the capacity of the high school. I do feel that the 800 number may be a little bit on the high side, but I clearly look at the 10th day enrollment, which I have right here, and it shows that there are 3,182 kids in grades 1, 2, and 3. I personally can see the high school maxing out at about 3,300 to 3,400 kids. If you take 2,700 and add 800 up, you get 3,500. Again, I think 3,500 may be somewhat on the high side, but that can be up for discussion. I've talked to Dr. Bose about it, and I don't think that it's a number that's totally off the wall. I think we do need to move forward with it. Don, I would like to ask you again, as far as John Fisher's plan, would you like to have him come to a board meeting, a work session that we could just ask him about the Penmont, or what was the, because I think we need to move forward with this, with an addition of the high school. In respect to John, and John did spend a lot of time on his Penmont plan, what is it that you're really asking that the board would do with the Penmont plan?
I guess what I'd like is just to have in public the identical session that we had the opportunity we had to meet, it was Bond, Wood, Bose, Clemens, Mengel, and Fisher in a meeting. I believe it was prior to this new board taking their seats. It was a memo sent out, I believe, to all the board members. But anyway, we had an opportunity to talk to John Fisher at that time. And he was not told at that time exactly what Dr. Bose would be bringing forward, but we had discussion based on, do you remember?
Well, I met with him to share with him what I was presenting.
Okay, you have done that. And there were also points that he made as to why he felt that Penmont wouldn't work under certain considerations. And I believe that just needs to be brought forward either by John Fisher or by Dr. Bond, recounting that situation with Fisher in the audience, and put that specific plan, Penmont, which did garner support in this last election, put it to rest.
Well, I think we need to do that sooner than later.
Correct.
I think that needs to be part of the discussion at the next work session.
Okay.
I think we need to revisit this. I don't think we're ready to RFP yet. Art, I know you have a plan that you need to get working on as far as how you will RFP it, but I'm hearing from board members some different ideas. I know we need to give Juan and Dr. Bose direction to move on, but I would like to say that I think we should visit it again next month, bring John Fisher in, put that to rest.
Put it to rest.
Okay, get some consensus from this board, whether this board is open to the standalone edition. There's been many comments about the edition. I think all board members, new board members, deserve a copy of the plan that was presented to the past board members, which I believe Mr. Breslin did prepare, that they get a chance to look at that. Keep in mind that plan did come in at the tune of somewhere around $30 million. It was quite high, but we look at that. We look at Mr. Fisher's plan, we look at that, and then I think we put it to rest at the next work session, and we try to get a consensus to move forward with Dr. Bose's proposal.
I realize that you are correct that the RFP might not be ready immediately, but Art, I think all service providers should be put on notice that there are no more promises of work, and that there'll be work based on competition. And so you might not put that RFP out tomorrow morning, but the heads are up.
One last thing I'd like to add is that I think I've talked to enough board members on the side. I think I sense that these board members, or at least the majority of this board, has a cap in mind of what we will let this administration work with. In the past, the administration has come forward to a board, proposed a building, and pretty much the board said, okay, build it at that cost. Again, I sense from the majority of this board that the administration will be working with a cap. And I'd like to discuss a cap on what the cost of that structure will be. It may be too early at March meeting, but I think that also has to become as part of our discussion. So then there aren't any surprises on what it's going to cost. And again, as Dr. Bose talked about, perhaps a small theater or something like that, we can look at the ads. Okay, you're going to get this much for this amount of dollars, you're going to get this much. One other thing I'd like to add, in the past, we've always built, I've discussed this with Art Wood, we've always built primarily with block, then with insulation, and then a brick veneer. I've talked to Art about us looking into split face. A split face structure is being used by many districts, and it is at a lower cost, but it is a very beautiful building. I've talked to Art about that. I think our actual building costs could come in lower, and we could still have a very desirable building. So, in saying all that, I do feel we need to revisit this. We'll revisit it next month, and unless there are any other substantial comments, I'd like to move on. David.
Is there anything that we could add to Art's workload within the next month that would allow him to make some progress, that would not cost us anything, that would not affect anything other than speeding up the time frame? Should we come to that work session and perhaps a consensus that this is the concept that we're going to move forward with?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
I'd like to go back to the fact that and Dr. Bose seemed to give some credibility to it, that we should be seeking what architect plans are already sitting up in the state, which don't require an RFP.
Right.
And bringing in those community representatives willing to volunteer their time simply to help us get to the development stage of what we might be looking at before we do an RFP. Because we ought to at least have an idea of whether we want to go in that direction before we're out hunting for an architect for that type of job. So it seems like the cart would get before the horse.
Mr. Chair, I would and I will tomorrow confirm the copyright. There's always been a question about taking other people's plans and using them.
And I need to clarify that with the Department of Ed as it relates to copyright. The last time I checked on that, there was a copyright question.
What I understood was we purchased the plans, and as a government entity, it's been paid for, including state tax dollars. And it's those plans for every public school that's been built for taxpayer money, that the plans are owned by the people of the state.
I will get you a clarification on that.
I would appreciate that.
Hey,
I'd
listen,
also...
Vicki, I really want to wrap this up. We have a lot to do tonight, okay?
Thank
And
you.
we're gonna revisit it again next meeting.
But if
okay?
we're going to be efficient, then I think we ought to know what we need to consider if we're going to be ready for the next meeting. The math and science...
Okay, then I will tell you. I don't agree that we need to go to the state and get prints. We can discuss this all night. Fine, I'm open that Art's going to call about that. Personally, I don't think that's feasible to even think about that, but I'm open for Art to do that. But what else do you want to
We
bring up?
weren't talking for the actual building, but just for Dr. Bose to at least come forward with a more concrete plan as to where we're headed.
What else do we want to talk about
For
tonight?
instance, the Math and Science Technology Center, Dr. Bose, this was before your time, but there was some support that rather than a fully self-contained where we're building everything that needs to be in a separate school, that we focused on a certain area of education and built a tower there. It was stated also during the election, as well as the Penmont plan, that each and every plan would have its day in court. So Tom, I'm going to ask, you could consider a separate facilities meeting that is not bombarding us with many different topics on a packed agenda, but a separate facilities meeting that we could be prepared to follow through with that pledge that each of the alternatives would have their day in court, so that this community can develop an opinion as to whether or not we're headed in the right direction. Because as Dr. Vaughn said, everyone in here can have a different idea, and everyone in the community has an idea.
I would just like to make a suggestion, and maybe we could help to proceed at the speed that we would like to. We did allude when we first took office that as a board we wanted a full public review of the Panmont plan and an expansion. We've been waiting patiently for Dr. Bose's concept, and I'm willing to take a further look at this concept, but I do believe that we have an obligation to fulfill. I would appreciate, as I'm sure the community would appreciate, that before the February action meeting, if it could be made public, the Penmont plan with the full review, if you will, in writing of the same administrators who met with you and Mrs. Mangle with Mr. Fisher. I would like those to be released to that with the Penmont plan and the administrators' comments publicly in ample time before the February action meeting. In that, I would also like to see the Breslin-Richard expansion plans, a modified copy of that with square footage, with the amenities that were included in that. And I would also like to see that released to the public, so that as a board member, I have the next 4 weeks to take a look at that information, or 2 weeks, I'll give you 2 weeks to put it all together, that I would have a full 2 weeks to review those 3 options and be prepared, and have the community be able to come prepared to the February action meeting to give us their input, and for us to discuss further on what is the appropriate way to go. But I would really like to take definitive action on this question at the February action meeting. And that would be my suggestion, rather than forming a committee and going through, another couple of months of review. I think what is in order.
Okay.
There's enough time for the
Juan, you've
public
heard
to look
that?
at those 3
Bud,
options.
I mean, we've heard that. Well, what does the board think about a Saturday, that the board takes and we do a Saturday work session, and we try to hit it all on a Saturday, sometime in February?
Has to be a Saturday, so be it. I do believe it deserves.
I just think Saturday, we get started early, and if it goes, pardon me?
Public work session,
It'll be a public work session,
separate from the usual agenda items, but facilities only, right?
facilities only, that's all we'll talk about. When we gonna do it? We'll,
I think you better circulate three dates and see where you.
or a couple weeks?
I'll have my information ready for you Thursday evening, the expansion. I mean, I
Okay.
have all that information.
Thursday evening.
We'll announce it, but sometime within the next few weeks on a Saturday, we will have a work session, and it will be in regards to the ideas that have been presented tonight, but we will focus in on trying to come to consensus as to which way we'll head for an action meeting as to authorize the administrators to proceed.
I should clarify, Mr. President, I think what you'll remember is the meeting with Mr. Fisher produced no summary or record. So what you might be talking about is a recreation of that if he were to be invited to that Saturday work session. That would be fine.
Fine.
His notes.
I'm sure.
Okay. Dr. Bond, any questions, or you pretty much have your marching orders with Dr. Bose?
I have my marching orders, and my understanding is we're going to march to the tune of action in February.
Here, here. Here, here.
Why? I heard one person.
Mrs. Scher does not necessarily agree with that. She didn't hear consensus on that. We're going to try. I mean, we're going to give it.
Yeah.
We're going to give it a whirl.
It's amazing, we're gonna do in 2 months what couldn't get done. I don't propose that we take the delays and we follow through with the delays that have occurred in the past. But this is another one where there's a holding pattern, and then all of a sudden you just rush and jump off. I would like these
Well,
reviewed.
I'm
I
ready
would
to
like
move.
one made by the spring.
This board member is
But
ready
I
to
want to
move
make
forward.
sure that I said, I believe we'd be decisive, but also deliberative.
Right, well, this
And
board
I would like
member
to know
has an
which way we're
idea
headed
in his
because
mind
some
which way we
states-
should head.
Yeah.
So we're
You
going
already
to
know?
work it out on a Saturday, and I'll inform all the board members when it'll be.
Now, Tom, would the public be able to attend this work session?
Absolutely, there will be time for public comment at that meeting on that Saturday. Okay, anything else? Anything outstanding from the board that has to be brought up on this matter? All right, we need to move on to our snow days, and after snow days, we will open it up to audience of citizens on the three subjects that we've just discussed. Snow days, Dr. Bose.
Mr. President,
This is an important subject. We need to listen.
members of the board, I don't think that we've heard the expression blizzard of '96 as a casual and insufficient explanation as to what we've endured without even passing through 1/3 of the winter of '95-'96. So my concern as a superintendent of schools is that Mother Nature may have more in store for us in the remaining over 2 months of winter. So I'm suggesting that the board authorize the adjustment of the school calendar so that we do not go to school into the last week of June and graduate our seniors considerably later than many of them are anticipating and planning, and all the family connections and family planning that influences. We obviously made up one day when we went to school yesterday. And I'm proposing that the board consider scheduling school on these days for which school is not now scheduled, to make up more of those days, again, to reduce the likely or potential impact on the month of June. We now do not have school scheduled on these days, February 16th, February 15th, February 16th, February 19th. 2 staff training days and the President's holiday. That we also consider scheduling school on Thursday, April 4, and Monday, April 8. And that we schedule school on April the 23rd and the first day into June, June 13th, to make up the now 7 remaining days we've lost to the early winter of '96. And I would propose that the board discuss the impact it sees on the community, as well as the advantages of trying to make up this many school days before we encounter more bad weather, if that's what Mother Nature has in store for us, and that the board consider acting on this proposal at its Thursday action meeting.
Okay. Mrs. Mengel?
Just a question, Dr. Bose, am I reading this correctly, that all vacation time previously planned in February between in-service and President's holiday would be removed under this plan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I guess my concern would be, there are those who, because there was, I think, 5 days, if you included a weekend, that there are people who planned vacations over that time. And I guess as you look at February and as you look at April, where I would anticipate if anybody planned any vacation, would have been during those times, that you shave off a little bit of each instead of all one month taking the hit. I see leaving, maybe leaving 15 and 16 alone, but leave out 19th or something. Whoever has made plans for February, of which I have not, for the record, whoever has bought tickets or has made any plans that they cannot get reimbursed for, that might be kind of unfair. Maybe we shaved off a little bit of everybody. No one will get hit that bad.
Ms. Mingo, I don't consider this an absolute
Okay.
necessity from my point of view. I think it's a decision that board members make who live in and among the community, who represent the community's interest, and who have some barometer kind of sense in what the community would accept and what the community wouldn't accept. What I'm pointing out is that we now, without any of these days, if we didn't make up any of them, we will now end school on the third Friday in June. And if we have any more days, we go into the last week of June. Now, as many families make plans for that time in June, even though we announced we're going to make them up, but the blizzard of '96 was a bizarre occurrence. We're talking about the largest single snowfall in this area's history, and the likelihood that we might have more days. But I say to you, your privilege and your agony is it's your decision. I can smile on that.
Yes.
All right, so Mrs. Mengel, in February, I think I understood you say that perhaps keep
15 and 16 be restored, and that 19th be removed.
That's the actual.
Or take the 15th and restore the 19th. But here you're losing all three. Let me see.
Let's hear. Let's stick with February. This is going to be tough to do.
Can I just ask a question?
Audience, we have to work this out, and it's going to be difficult. So I'd ask that you please bear with us. Give us the time to discuss it. You'll get your time, okay? Let us see if we can work together on this to come to some consensus. So, how about what Mrs. Mengel brought up over on this side? Is there any strong feelings one way or the other in February?
I accept it as is.
You accept it as Dr. Bose proposed?
I do too, because the weather we're having, what happens if we have a couple more snow days in February? I mean, it looks like it's going to be a rough winter. January and February are rough months. And I think if you start taking some makeup days, we could have you pack it on the end. Could be maybe affecting what we're going to do at Penndale? Could it be affecting the project over there?
That's a good point, Mr. Mosey. I failed to point that out. We would affect conceivably the completion of and cost of the completion of the Penndale project. If we had to go overtime, work weekends, in order to have it ready for the opening of school.
I think that Dr. Bose is probably, it's not an easy task. You've probably spent a lot of time on this, and it's not an easy thing to bring before the community, but someone has to do it. So obviously, I'm just for keeping it as it is, because I'm concerned with February. It's going to be hopefully it'll be better than January, but there's no guarantee. I agree with David, keep it as it is right now.
Over this side? Questions, comments?
I like the way it is.
Vicki?
Question.
Okay.
The blizzard may have been a novelty for our area, but revisiting the calendar is not. This is an annual affair ever since we put our snow days at the end of the year, which I definitely took a strong stand against last year. We always end up having to come back and rewrite holidays. I will say that through my experience in seeking numbers subsequent to the days off as to what was teacher attendance as well as student attendance, the holidays that you're restoring have traditionally been left open for the staff to be off and be replaced by substitutes. After reports have been that basically quite a high percentage of the students are really dealing with substitutes when they really feel they've been unfairly treated by having their holidays stolen to begin with, while they're also in very small, poorly attended classrooms, too. What I'd like to know is what will be the options for the staff if we do restore these as official school days? Will they have an open door for time off?
Are we talking just the fifth? Let's start with the 15th and the 16th?
If there's a difference, then fine. If there's a difference in how we're handling the President's Day holidays versus the spring break days, either way, I'd like to know what the conditions are. Because we pay for substitutes at $80 a day.
Well, that's obviously a decision that the board's going to have to make in terms of how they handle those days. It has not been a tradition that happens. In fact, quite some number of years ago, we did go to the concept of putting the makeup days at the end of the year, and for a number of years that worked quite well. 2 years ago it did not, simply because we had 14 days. We're back at a point right now where we're heading toward the same kind of year. The calendar that exists this year is a direct result of all the conversation that went into the problems that we had 2 years ago. We continued for many years to have the whole week off at the spring break. That has been adjusted this year. And the conversations that occurred to get us to the point where we recommended a calendar that made up the time at the end of the year with the holidays in as they currently exist came as a result of the knowledge that we had gathered after a very bad year. If whatever you want to do, that's entirely up to the board. The board can change it any way they want, to Dr. Bose's recommendation or back to whatever you want. And then you're going to have to decide what you're going to do with the ramifications that brings. I mean, I don't see any alternative but to say very candidly that if you're going to take days that people may have made plans for, then you're just going to have to tell them to change their plans.
Under the last conditions, Fred, we did allow, there were days taken off, and of course then when we replaced them with $80 days with the substitutes, quite frankly, because the students clocked a day, there really wasn't a teaching day.
Yeah, but don't forget or don't misunderstand how we got to that point. For many years, we made calendars that guaranteed people they would have that time off. And the reason the calendar was based on that was simply because in the past, many years ago when we had problems, we would not have a calendar that was consistent. And when something happened, we'd change the calendar. So we went to a system that said we will make sacred these certain days, or the spring break. Therefore, if you've got plans, make plans. 2 years ago, we decided to change that. But many people, and if my numbers are correct, as I recall it, there were like 130 teachers who, as a result of the board recommending it, came to me with guaranteed reservations where they would have lost money had they broken those reservations. We filled in 130 different positions for 3 days to allow those people to do that because the board elected on the spur of the moment to change the calendar.
But that we are right back there today. These are designated holidays. They were, the calendar in itself really did place the snow days at the end of the year. If we had addressed the situation that occurred 2 years ago, we would have perhaps built a calendar that put Easter, the spring break in as it was, but asterisk snow days. Therefore, they were on notice that they could possibly be removed. A compacted calendar leaves you nowhere else to go except either to take them at the end of the year or then go back and take away designated holidays.
But Vicki, I'm
that aren't
not,
noticed.
I'm not quite sure I know what your point is or what your question is.
Where are
It's
we-
easy to say in hindsight, and you've been a part of the conversation and you voted on the calendar each year. I don't know how we solve what your question is, because it sounds to me like it's both things. We should have done this, but since we didn't, now we need to do this.
No, what I'm saying is that we are now, what will be our situation with our staff?
I have no idea.
Because we are, once again, taking away designated holidays, not the holidays that are asterisk as first to go or second to go, snow days. It's that simple. We are in the same dilemma, in a sense, as we were before, and I wonder under what conditions will this be occurring, because we had quite a few teachers off for the spring break who could not really compensate for that time in teaching time because the student calendar was fulfilled and their time was replaced by a paid substitute. And we also had a very big change in the student population. That's important to me as I weigh whether it's really worthwhile to break into the spring break or those popular vacation times, because the students really didn't have a normal educational week that week anyway. Neither
Well,
in staff.
but it's a circular argument, and like I said, we've had those arguments. You can easily say, well, if you break into there, then we're not going to have the attendance that we expect. We're not going to have all the teachers in the classroom that we want. If you do it at the end, you still have the same kind of an argument. You're not going to get the same kind of attendance at the end of the year. You're not going to get the same quality of teaching at the end of the year.
But
It's a lose-lose kind of situation when you change the calendar. This calendar recommends that we have 4 in-service days for teachers at the end of the year. And at the cost of $40-some thousand per day, it's a pretty steep expense to have in-service days at the end of the year. But, you know, what else do you want to do? You only have certain choices.
Well, that's why I'm wondering is it really going to be worthwhile in the compensation of the day there? Or do we look to modify it in some way to where we're not as extreme with trying to take them all out? And place a couple at the end of the year where the snow days were designated at least. We do at least have something to stand on in that is where the board at the time they approved this calendar designated them.
Well, we have some practical, at least one practical problem I would suggest to you that you need to deal with. And maybe it helps answer your particular question, I don't know. But if you look at the 3-day weekend that we have in place for February, if you do away with the 3-day weekend, teachers can, because of the rest of the recognized holiday that exists now, teachers cannot take personal days without reason the day before, the day after a holiday. So that whatever you do with your calendar, you can't create a situation where many of them perhaps have planned that anyhow, and by virtue of being able to take 2 of those days, although not consecutive days, because they're not also allowed to take consecutive days for personal days without reason, but they could take a Thursday and a Monday without reason, with pay, and deduct for Friday. You could easily set up a situation where they say, okay, we'll take the day without pay, and still have a lot of teachers out. At the spring break, if you leave Good Friday in as a holiday, or whatever you want to call that day, then people can't take Thursday and Monday without reason. I mean, every way you look at it, you've got some different problems to deal with. I think Dr. Bose and the Cabinet's looked at this. It's not perfect. No calendar is. But, you know, you decide whether you want to put them at the end or put them in here.
But it is an alternative.
And by the way, you're going to put them at the end anyhow, so you still got them at the end.
That's the point, that you said it well. This is an alternative to extending the school year well into June, as Mr. Mosey said, with still most of the winter left. I'm not suggesting you have no choice, you certainly have a choice. And with some apology, I apologize that I put the dilemma in your lap, but you're the only one that can do this. You're the only one that can change the school calendar. And so this is an option against what other days of school we might miss, as weather conditions might require in the winter days ahead, as opposed to extending possibly into the last week of June, the school year.
Spring holiday. Huh. I'm still trying to understand the whole thing. Bill, comments?
Yes.
Because then I can keep working on it as you make comments.
I won't be long, though, so work quickly. As I looked at this, I saw the possible solution to the biggest dilemma going on at my house right now, which is senior week. I say, take them to school to the 27th. Discussion closed. However,
Try to solve that problem.
Just got my attention there, Mr. Allen.
However, I have stated up here before that I have learned from talking to students, teachers, and administrators that very little good educational time goes on after June 1st arrives and the 75, 80-degree heats arrive. And I don't see, if we're going to compare the value of education of substitutes versus June, we could debate that forever. But I'm in favor of keeping the calendar as Dr. Bose proposed it for educational reasons, but also gives us that cushion of more bad weather days. So I would like to, my vote for consensus is keep it as proposed. Thank you.
John? So it sounds to me like there are at least 4 who want to go with it as it's proposed by Dr. Bose. I heard Pat, I heard David, I heard Bill, I heard John. I need to hear Don.
Yes, go with it.
Tom, I only asked to know what the conditions are. I did call you and talk to you about this. I'd like to know what will be the implementation of this as far as with the staff and how we're following through.
Well, I've been
answer.
trying to understand this whole thing, and
What I'm saying is-
I see that it's going to make it harder for Fred, this calendar.
Well,
From
you
past.
need to understand that the calendar that you approve carries with it the same obligations that we've had under any other calendar, and it carries with it the same privileges that we've had under any other calendar. So that the teachers can take their days without reason in an appropriate way, as they would have done otherwise.
Under the new contract, yeah.
It doesn't, to me, create the kinds of problems we created a couple of years ago when we had 130 subs for 3 days that we had.
But I think it's
have a
safe to
run
say
on
we need
days
to be
off.
aware that there will be subs in on those days.
Absolutely.
Fred, how many did we have off the last time, wasn't it?
We had about 130.
130 teachers were out on a single day. That is not an everyday occurrence here under the normal.
We've had as many out as 103 or 104 this year already on a single day.
Right. Okay, I clearly hear that there are 5 people who want to go with this as it's proposed by Dr. Bose. So I don't think that there's any reason to discuss it any further at this point.
No, not at all.
So, in saying that, that this is going to go on the agenda. I hear that 5 board members support it, and for the audience, these days listed, I think it's safe to say that that's how this board will move forward. We will be voting on this particular item Thursday night. Again, for those of you who weren't here, you got to change the tape, I know that. Is that the only thing we're going to vote on Thursday night in regards to this agenda are these days that we just talked about. Okay, now we're going to take a break before the audience of citizens to change the tape. Let's be back by 9:30, ready to go. It's 25 after. Okay, we need to reconvene. What I'd like to do is, for the audience of citizens, I'd ask that you be sure to limit your questions to 3 minutes. And also, what I'd like to do is address the makeup days first. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the makeup days, what we just talked about. Yes. Yes, you have to come up. It's Fran, right?
That's fine.
I guess I'm sorry, Fifi Fennel, Lansdale. I guess the comment I have is I agree with the schedule Mr. Bose has for several reasons. Number one, the school year is a school year for educational reasons, not for vacation reasons. Students can make up those days, just as my daughter did when I took her out of school to go to Disneyland. She had to make up those scheduled days and the work that was involved in it, and that's how it has to be if someone has to plan vacation now. In addition to that, I don't know if anybody has been in Penndale in the summer months, but that school is excruciatingly hot. And for a student to have to learn in that heat, they won't learn anything at the end of June. Now is the time they will learn. At the end of June, it's not possible, not in that heat. So that's what I have to say about that, and I have other things, but would you rather me wait?
Let's work on the, let's get the makeup days out of the way. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. Greg Anderson, Montgomery Township. Just real quickly, I was looking at the calendar. I was thinking more about the kids here. I see 3 uninterrupted months with really no vacation at all, which I think is difficult to keep concentration as well. I'm thinking maybe stick with the calendar, but give back one of those spring holiday ones, perhaps the day after Easter, since that is the holiday for most people, or be prepared to give that back if there are no further snow problems, just so the kids do get a few days off. I think they can get overwhelmed by having to go to school day after day after day after day, 3 months in a row with no break whatsoever. I think everybody, even at work, you take a couple days off every now and again. I don't think there's anybody even goes to their job 3 months in a row without taking a Friday off or something like that. I think giving back one of those days and adding that last Friday may not be. I also counted 181 days, so I think there would still be 1 day to give back in an emergency and still meet the Pennsylvania state guidelines. So just another thought for consideration.
I might add that a person called me and told me that they added 180. They counted 181 days also. So that needs to be checked into.
It is, that's by contract.
Okay. That's true.
That's
Keep in mind, we're paying people to work 181 days. If we give it away, it's what, Fred, estimate $40,000 a day?
Teachers.
We should do that only with great care.
Okay, next. Just keep in mind as you come up, you've all heard the way that the majority of this board is going to vote. So just keep that in mind as you make your comments.
My name is Carol Gannister, and I live at 113 Twining Road in Montgomery Township. I had the conversation with my son, who is an 8th grader at Pembroke, just a few days ago about how to make up the snow days. And his comment to me was he would rather make them up during the school year than at the end of June, because he would actually learn something, whereas at the end of June, the only thing they do is have picnics and watch movies. Thank you.
Any other comments on the makeup days? Okay, hearing or seeing none, let's move backwards to, what do we do second? The high school concept plan. Mr. Bailey.
I have several comments. I think it was a good concept, but I do have some concerns. I would strongly recommend and plead that the administration and perhaps the board do an actual physical check of the actual classrooms that are there. I believe the 2,700 person capacity was calculated on the basis of the plans that were submitted to the state, which plans say there are roughly 60 general classrooms with 600-odd square feet and a maximum physical capacity of 25 students. Now, last spring, when I went there and I looked at those general classrooms, they do not have 600 square feet. They have 850 square feet. They do not have 25 desks. They have 30 desks. That difference of 5 desks per classroom for 60 classrooms is enough to accommodate 300 of the 800 students. Additionally, the 850 square foot size was actually designed for 35 desks, and several of those classrooms, when I went last spring, actually had 35 desks in them, and the rooms were not crowded. That difference comes to 600 of the 800 student capacity that's needed to be added. So I think that much of that additional capacity that you're planning to add can be accommodated within the context of the existing building. That's my major concern. A minor concern is I hope that before we add a second lunchroom in a separate building, that somebody consider the first cost and operating cost and other pros and cons of expanding the existing lunchroom so that it has the capacity to handle the total number of students that would be handled by two separate lunchrooms. That way we may get some economies of scale in food preparation and food deliveries and all that other stuff. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I want to give someone, anyone else in the audience? Chuck, in the back.
Good evening, I'm Chuck Hammond from Montgomery Township. I fully support the addition. I do have some concerns or recommendations. One, that it be built in close proximity to the existing structure, that we do not get into a new land acquisition if at all possible. I think we have enough land on Keenest Road that if we need additional ball fields, we have a $5 million development down there we can build ball fields on. I would strongly suggest that we look closely at a self-contained grade structure within that facility, perhaps a 10th grade or 11th grade or something like this. You may not be able to fully encompass it in the building, but you may be close enough to be able to keep as much traffic between the two facilities down as possible. If you had like one complete structure in there of a particular grade, you could have your teachers, your grade counselors, what have you, perhaps within that one facility. I also do not support any duplication, if possible, of things like cafeterias, gymnasiums, and these types of structures. And the possibility of reworking of the architectural plans that we had for the second high school, there may be something that can be done with those that would also cut down somewhat on our costs. The internal facilities, perhaps, as far as classrooms and this type of thing, may be adaptable to the new structure that we're looking at. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Then we'll come back to feet.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Manis in Tomanson Township. First of all, Dr. Bond, I hope you're still running the high school when my 3 children are there.
What grade are your youngsters in?
6th, 3rd, and kindergarten.
It's getting old fast.
And so needless to say, I have many concerns about where we're headed. First of all, I would applaud Mrs. Mengel with her can-do attitude. If that's the way this board is going to operate, then I applaud it, because that's what we need to do. I do have 3 children, and I have very personal concerns about where they're going to be, and I would very much like to keep them in the North Penn School District. Mr. Clemens, I think the idea of moving and having some meetings on Saturdays, and if it's more than one Saturday and you need to do that, I think that's something this board should consider, because we need to get moving now. And as a community, I think we've been through this so many times. I can't imagine that there are any more studies that we can conduct that will give us any more information than we already have. So again, I think we're headed in the right direction, and it's nice to hear. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Beefy? And then Greg.
Biffy Fennell, Lansdale. I also agree. I think the addition is an excellent plan. However, I do think that a cafeteria is needed. I do agree with the gentleman prior that it's a good idea maybe to have a 1-grade structure in there, whether it's a 10th, 11th, or 12th grade in there. I think that's an excellent idea. I'd rather see 10th or 12th, not 11th. I also feel that there's an option that I don't know that anybody's considered that would also help with the flow, and that is the changing of scheduling into something called a block scheduling. Happer Horsham is using it at this time, has been for over 4 years, as is CB, or Central Bucks School District. They're 90-minute classes broken down into 2 halves of a school year. It alleviates a lot of flow through the schools. The hallways are not as congested. You have more time with the students. The students have a better understanding of the teacher, as does the teacher with the student. And I think it needs to be seriously considered when you're looking at remodeling a school district. You need to look at all aspects, not just the building. I think that'll be a big help. I hope it's considered.
Thanks. Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Collins, are you going to talk about the financing as a separate thing, or should I include that in these
No,
remarks?
that'll be next.
Okay, I want to include that in these remarks then. I heard a number of comments made that I can agree with, and I was thinking about myself, but otherwise I hate to be a party pooper, but I think that the reliance on current demographics is a completely inadequate way to decide how to spend several tens of millions of our dollars. The PEL exists, its purpose of existence for 501 school districts is to tell us more about what we don't know for certain about the future. And what they tell us is that the current demographics are not a good reflection of what we can expect for the future. I know that I am the only person in this room who knows exactly how many houses are yet to be built in Montgomery Township, because I've had this conversation with the township manager, and I know that nobody else in this room has. And if we don't...
Excuse me?
I've talked to him about it. I've asked, has anybody from the school board or the school system talked to you recently about how many building permits and how many buildable lots are available? He tells me nobody asks him these questions.
Your information is incorrect.
It's incorrect.
And also, there are supervisors who can pass on and distribute that information.
I don't see this being factored in then, because I've been told there's anywhere from 600 to 800 available additional building locations just in Montgomery Township, and that doesn't lend credence to the idea that class sizes which are now...
Mr. Anderson has the floor.
Which are now of the 1,100 size in our grades 1 and 2, not getting any larger by the time they reach the high school. I don't see that it's credible to say that those class sizes will stay fixed at a level of 1,100 for another 8 years into the future. I think there ought to be some projection of that, and not just say, well, we have that many kids now, let's pretend that the class sizes won't grow when historically they have always grown in this district. And build something which barely meets the number of students we now have, and then where do we go? I think we end up like Hatboro Horsham. I think we end up, and like what happened to us at Bridle Path, you end up opening a school that's over capacity by the time you finish building it. I don't see much margin for error in this decision, quite honestly. If we are wrong, and if these projections are wrong, it will be a costly thing to fix, and I think that ought to be considered. I would also like at that action meeting to be able to hear at least a rough estimate of what this cost is going to be. Because as Mr. Mosey said, the first thing that occurred to me was I spent this whole election hearing about how Keenest Road High School would be second rate. And what I heard initially is, a second-rate high school moved to the site we already have. I hear about, well, we'll need a cafeteria, and by the way, we might build a theater. Well, after a while, what do you have? You have another small high school on the same plot of ground. I don't see that you've significantly changed the decision except, where the location is going to be. So I agree with Mrs. Scher. This is a time for deliberation. This is a lot of money to be spending, and to say, well, we've heard this before or whatever, we haven't heard it in the context of the current demographic situation, and I don't think we should be quite that hasty if it means that we won't repent at leisure.
Thank you. Mr. Long?
Steve Long from Montgomery Township. I don't profess to know whether we should build for 600, 800, 1,000, or whether we should build an addition or a standalone tower. One of the things I do know is that technology is not something of the future. Technology is actually here today. And perhaps a revision to any of the concepts that are out there is whatever is built, instead of building that as a second mini high school, as another addition, can we not consider this addition, this new building or whatever, to be something of a special services utility building, and the existing high school have that all classroom or all instructional? If we have labs in there, can we not have computer lab, math lab, science lab, or perhaps an ultra-modern band setup or whatever in our new building? And that way, when years from now, when people are talking about what happened in North Penn, we can wind up turning back to them, and we can wind up saying that this is North Penn's technical center or North Penn's special services concept, something along the line that puts us in the forefront of other school districts instead of people looking at us to try to figure out, are we putting a Band-Aid on our building? I'd like to see us take another step and put ourselves in the forefront of other school districts. Thank you.
Ma'am?
My name is Eleanor O'Cotney. I live in Montgomery Township. I think the thing that concerns me the most is that, as we're all well aware, time is marching on. I think Mr. Wood was probably very realistic in his concept of how long it would take for us to get to a place where we could move into a new building. And my concern is, based on our current enrollment figures, which we're going to maybe use as a basis for our decisions, when will we exceed the capacity of that present high school? We can't move into something now until 1999 at the best. What happens when we go over capacity before 1999? And I think this is something that must be very clearly spelled out as part of your decision of what you intend to do. You made a stand for a certain type of leadership when you all became elected to this board, and I think we need to have an answer to that question soon.
Juan, would you like to get
Sure.
answer tonight or get back to her at a later time?
It'll only take me a minute.
Okay.
One of the things that we're building into this is a 5-year plan, or a plan that leads up to the entrance into that building. So we'll be coming forward with not just a plan to enter that building, but the things that we need to do to get ready for that. So your point is well taken, and that will be done.
And there will definitely be a concrete answer to what happens when there are more children than there are spaces.
It'll be as concrete as I can give you on that particular night.
Okay, I certainly hope so. Because I think that day is going to come sooner than we think.
I know it will.
Yeah?
Hi, I'm Risa Altman, Montgomery Township. I'm a graduate of George Washington High School class, and I graduated with a class of approximately 950 students. And I believe that continues to be one of the largest schools in the state, and I believe that North Penn is projected to probably surpass that at some point. And I cringe when I think of a class over 1,000 with the competition of extracurricular activities, academic competition, risk for condoning larger class sizes that was mentioned, 25 became 30, became 35, and just allowing the larger classroom sizes as an excuse for expansion. As I drive through Montgomery Township, and I agree with Greg, that I see the buildings going up. There's a Montgomery Crossings of 244 homes. Montgomery Oaks is going up that is being built. There's undeveloped land by recognized developers in the land. I don't know whether it's Paone or DeLuca development that is not yet developed but is for sale at the far end of Montgomery Township. And I really think you're underestimating the capacity of Montgomery Township. And I also can't believe that with 3,200 first, second, and third graders, averaging about 1,100 students per class, that with those projections and the new developments coming out, that you're not going to see 1,300 and 1,400 students per class 6 years from now as a first grade class entering in what is that, is 2002. I live in Montgomery Township. I know that the preference of our community was for a second high school. It might be up for another consideration. I think it's totally underestimating building a building with a capacity of 800 students, and I think 6-7 years from now, when you're thinking about the first graders and second graders, one of which my son is a second grader now, I think you're going to be way below the expected capacity, and I really ought to think reconsider the building. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the high school addition concepts, ma'am?
My name is Cindy Granenko. I'm from Towamencin. Just a quick comment. When we first spoke of building a second high school, there was a discussion of the need for an additional elementary school. I haven't heard anything about that in recent talks, and I'm wondering, that was a definite given, we need another elementary school. When this all comes into play and we talk about that, I personally feel that that needs to be discussed too, because that's money, and I think it was Pat Mosey had said something about he wants all the money out there. Is there any plan for discussing that? at the same time?
At
Because
this
that was
point-
that was
At
together.
this point, not that I know of, I could turn to Dr. Bond or Dr. Sugar to try to answer that, or they could get back to you.
Well, right now, we're always trying to project ahead. It's a little tougher to project ahead because we don't have the real numbers for kindergarten and, you know, who is entering the elementary school, so the numbers get a lot fuzzier at the elementary level. But we are working ahead, and should be all right for next year the way things look, and I'm going to have a lot better figures by next week because the elementary principals already have my straight line projection ahead, and they're getting it back to me by the 22nd of this month.
Because it does take time to put in a building.
Yes,
And
definitely.
a brand-new building on a new location is not even just adding to the high school. So if we're already at capacity or nearing
Well, let's
capacity.
clarify something, ma'am. We are not at, our 10th day enrollment is 7226.
I'm saying at some of the elementary schools, aren't some of them near capacity? I believe they are.
They're getting close.
So, you know, if it's going to take, I don't know how long to build another high school, my question is, don't we need to see where that
Well,
falls
I'd like
into
to
play?
clarify for some of the quirks from the audience. We have a listed capacity of, I believe it's 7,600 that we can hold for elementary. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Art. And we have about 7,200 kids, right? Between 7,200 and 7,226, this 10th day says, to give you an idea for where we are overall elementary.
Yeah, I just, you know, I heard before the school year started that some of the schools were reaching capacity and they were being creative, like at Knapp, making their lobby into 2 classrooms. That's not my school, so I don't really know the details of it. I just know that some of even the new schools, I had heard that they were reaching capacity and you can't build a school by the next school year. So that was my concern. Is that something that's going to be talked about also?
At this point, there are no short-term plans for this board to talk about that. Any other questions or comments on the addition to the high school? Ma'am?
My name is Eileen McMullen from Lansdale. My question is concerning the enclosed entity that's to be, I don't call that an addition anymore, I don't know what it is. But anyway, it sounds like this structure is going to be built so there's no back and forth movement to the main building. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
That is not correct?
That's right.
It sounds like that it's going to be far enough away or enclosed enough that there's minimal, you won't go to this building for one class, be able to move back and forth easily?
It will be in very close proximity, and in light of the fact that in the initial discussions that we've had, we're not projecting an additional IMC, we're not projecting additional technology labs, we're not projecting additional homemaking classrooms, we're not projecting an additional health suite, so there is going to be the phys ed classes, the use of the natatorium.
But what you're talking is the bulk of your classes would be held enclosed in this building if you're in that certain group of students that you intend it for, which you do not know what.
We haven't even discussed that in great detail. That would be Dr. Bond's call, and that's not going to really be made until we meet with a planner.
But how can you agree to spend money and plan on things when you don't even have
We haven't
a
talked
concept?
about money, and we haven't agreed. I mean, there's been no dollar amount set forth. The whole thing has to go from a concept to a planned design or schematic, if you will, before you even begin to think about dollars and cost and program.
Well, I'm concerned about the program before things are voted on and pushed through.
There are all kinds of approvals. I mean, you're dealing with the state, you're dealing with reimbursement, you're dealing with PlanCon, you're dealing with the Department of Education, and there has to be, you know, a needs assessment and a justification for the building, which is PlanCon A, and that's the first part that you submit, and that's going to be designed by the instructional people as we go into the process.
But unfortunately, I know the public and the audience are going to want a vote on what we're going to do soon, and it sounds like you're going to need to vote before we have an idea of what this building is going to hold, contain, and do.
That building will first come, it's the board's building, and they will be voting on what is submitted, and at that time, at an open meeting, you certainly will see what is happening as far as the design of the building is concerned. I mean, it's not something that's going to evolve and all of a sudden construction's going to start.
Right.
There are an awful lot of milestones.
Eileen, did you come in late or not?
I did.
Okay. We have talked about scheduling Saturday workshops.
I heard that.
Okay, and I think we'll accomplish a lot. There were, on Saturdays, that this board will have a good understanding as to which.
There will be good ideas. What I'm asking is, there will be ideas on the table of what this separate entity will contain and what students it will probably involve, things like that.
You have to.
Okay, well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions or comments on the addition or the proposed concept? Okay, we'll now move on backwards to funding for Penndale, funding for the bond. Questions or comments on that discussion? Mr. Anderson.
Thank you again, Mr. Clemenson. I wanted to address a couple of things I think the board should consider in doing this bond issue. I wanted to answer Mr. Mosey's question because I happen to know the answer to it. The reason why the board was able, or why money was able to be spent apart from what was in the offering statement, is that the official statement says the money may be used for any purpose which the board may vote. There was a period of time starting in 1989 in which the boilerplate language of the bond contracts had an addition that it was not just for specific facilities projects, but had a general purpose clause that said basically if it's a capital improvement and the board votes for it, you can use the bond money in that way. So that removed any accountability to specific buildings and specific projects, and all money raised since that time has been raised with that in the official statement. So,
do you know that that's on all bond issues or just school bonds?
that actually is unusual.
Bonds,
My understanding is that that is unusual by the terms of school district borrowing in general. That's not a typical clause. It was not part of our language until that.
That's still in the clause, though.
Every bond that's been raised since then has had that opportunity in it. Yes. I would recommend that that be taken out of any future bonds, by the way, because I don't think that's even typical experience across the state in school districts, but that's why that was allowable. I just wanted to point out that we're in a period of historically low rates right now, and since we're going to have to be borrowing some money to do Dr. Bose's plan or whatever, now's the time to do it. So I would recommend the three options you have in front of you for this question, you go ahead and start borrowing some money. You're not going to find rates this low ever again. I think that's worth doing, but before you do that, I would recommend you get a full policy on the books of how the school district is going to raise money, how it's going to spend money, particularly bond indentures, because there's nothing right now that obligates this board to do anything particular whenever bond matters are brought in front of it. Nobody can be a bond expert just because they happen to be on a school board. That's why I think there needs to be policy to be followed, so you can cite the policy when these investment advisors and so forth come in. I also wanted to point out that I've run some quick analysis on the land in question, and I've determined that particularly if you use a short-term interest rate, as was suggested here, it would be cheaper to finance that land than to sell it. And that shouldn't surprise you because a lot of school districts have started buying up open land because they've determined that the cost of allowing development is higher than the cost of taking land off the market altogether. I ran some analysis using the numbers that have been presented by several developers proposing to build on other land in Montgomery Township. And if you use their econometric projections, it turns out that if you take the tax revenue you could hope to generate and subtract from that how much it would cost for the average number of kids coming out of the development, you'll run over a $400,000 subsidy off the Keenest Road property alone. It would cost less than that to borrow $6 million and do that. So I would recommend you consider that. That land you should know, you do know, is already approved for building. So if you sell it, I promise it will be to a developer who will immediately turn around and start building houses on it. The township has nothing further to do in terms of allowing those houses to get underway.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. 3 minutes are up. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Okay, hearing or seeing none. A question from Mrs. Mingle?
Just a comment. I wanted to seek permission. Mr. Anderson said that he had done an analysis. I found great interest in what you were saying here, and I'd appreciate a copy if you'd share that.
Sure.
I can keep the tape, but I'd rather have some hard copy if you provide it.
No problem.
Okay, get a copy in
Thank you.
Ken that he can distribute to all board members. Okay, thank you. Okay. No more funding questions. I didn't see any more hands.
Just
Okay, I'll come back.
clarification.
Vicki,
Just a
clarification?
clarification from some of the discussion that took place through the audience of citizens. It's been requested that we vote in February regarding the options. What I want to know is what vote then was Mrs. Krieger talking about, because I think that's what causes some concern.
Right.
That
We may
I
not-
know what the expansion is, I don't
Right.
know how
Well,
far the other
Art
plan.
has put out a timeline. We may not be ready to vote in February.
Right.
That's what the administration's requesting, but we may not be able to give them
Okay,
that vote
I
when
just
they
want to know
request
what
it.
is her intent? What was the proposed vote that was scheduled for February? A vote on which of the plans we would prefer to go with?
Well, I would turn that
Which
back
concept?
to Art or
Well,
to...
Which
what-
concept
what
we
we're
would follow, we would have
proposing
to...
is that you would take a position on this concept, authorize some preliminary dialogue with somebody capable of producing the estimates that you need for further consideration. Obviously, the cost of this facility, if it's a serious consideration, is going to be the primary influence on giving it a
Right.
final affirmation for completion. So the proposal would be that you authorize us to send RFPs out to architects, to look for somebody who might say, I'll give you an estimate without charge. And assuming we're dealing with competent people, then you're equipped with information that will enable you to give further consent to development of the plan.
That's fine. My reaction to that was because my understanding was that in February, it was anticipated that we would decide of those options that are discussed in the work session, expansion, PEMA plan, et cetera, which is the one that this board is going to focus on completely.
You have to decide that first.
Completely. And I would say that would be difficult to do when we have figures, we have visuals.
They may have to wait a couple months. We may have a couple
and I
meetings in
can't,
February on
and
Saturdays.
that concerned me that we could possibly be there without enough of a picture, and I think that was perhaps
Well,
one of
Mr.
the
Wood's work
citizens'
showed
concerns.
how quickly it could be done if everything clicked right along. Click,
We
click,
can get a
click.
ballpark figure, that's
You
one
can
thing.
move it back a month at a time for each month you need to deliberate.
Okay, just so we get more
Okay.
information.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it at our Saturday work session.
Yeah, I just couldn't see pulling all that focus together and all
By
that
February.
detail
Okay.
by February. Oof.
Any other questions on the previous topics? Okay, it's time to move on. Moving on to secondary education, I'll turn it over back to Dr. Bose and to Dr. Bond.
Well, these are three topics that have been on the back burner for a number of months. It should come as no surprise that we are considering where to assign children to our middle schools based upon the expectation that we will complete Penndale's renovation work prior to the opening of the 96-97 school year. And it is time for the Board of Education to consider the program of studies, as well as it has already done and approved the program of studies for the high school. Now it's doing so for the middle schools. And it is time for the board to consent to or to otherwise consider the practice that we have in the middle schools of using team teaching, and also whether or not we can do team teaching and restore the honors program in the 8th grade at the same time. One of Dr. Bond's priorities since taking on his new assignment is to work with the staff and the community members on these topics, and so we'll turn the spotlight again on Juan Bond for a presentation.
Aren't I lucky?
Aren't you lucky?
Quite frankly, I've been looking forward to an opportunity to talk about the teaming piece. I've heard and I've reviewed the tapes, and I'd like to take a moment or two to add some things to the green sheet that you have and to hopefully dispel some misnomers about teaming and to present teaming as I view it based on my research. I'd like to begin by thanking a lot of people who have helped me compile this research. Mrs. Clark to my left, and the middle school principals and the parents who have helped have been tremendous assistants. I have spoken with those groups. I have also spoken with a number of parents in the community who have youngsters in the middle schools relative to their feelings about teaming. Additionally, there was a survey sent to parents and to students that I'll speak on briefly. Just as a way of introduction, a short background, you are aware that in 1994, the middle school committee recommended that teaming go into the middle schools. One of the reasons that they recommended that was that middle school students are changing. We all know that. Those of us who have had middle school youngsters are well aware of that. They change physically, they change from a cognitive standpoint, socially and emotionally. The most important consideration that was given at that time, though, was relative to academics. The committee felt that a group of youngsters with the same teachers created a better academic environment for students to learn. Those students have the same teachers, and those teachers get to know the students better, get to deal with their strengths and their needs. It also provided an opportunity, and particularly as we deal with the enrollment increases, to get a smaller group in a large school and to hopefully ensure that every student had a place in the building. The reason we're discussing this tonight is because there's a concern that teaming costs an exceptional amount of money as compared to the traditional program. There was concern about the perception of the effectiveness of teaming and how much space it was taking, and again, given the enrollment status in this district. I've done quite a bit of research in trying to figure out why it was said that it cost us between 2 and 10 teachers to do teaming. I couldn't find it. I absolutely could not find it. I have compared teacher schedules before teaming and since teaming. I've compared room utilization before teaming and since teaming. And what we have found, what I have concluded, is that the cost relative to the middle school were due to 3 things. One was the increased enrollment that we experienced in the middle school. The other was the mandatory state-monitored special education programs in the middle school. And the third was the addition of exploratory program for 8th graders. Prior to the teaming, the 7th graders had the exploratory program, the 8th graders did not. As a part of the middle school package, all students in 7th and 8th grade experienced the exploratory program. My estimation is that that cost us about 2 teachers. Now, it wasn't 2 people, but it was comparable to 2 teachers in the number of periods that we needed in addition, so we say 2 teachers. I also found that the room utilization is the same. I've heard rumors that some of the classes have fewer students. If in fact you find a class was teaming with 10 students, it's because someone else has, 40 students or 45. But the class size guidelines remain the same for teaming as they did prior to teaming. So class sizes did not lessen because of the notion of teaming. I've heard that time and time again, and I couldn't find it. And I looked for it, and I looked for it. The student-teacher survey indicated that there were some questions, there were some concerns, there are some ways that people felt that we could make teaming better, but the survey did not say that it was broken. From my perspective, I don't think that something has to be broken for us to fix it. I think that you can shine it up, and I think that the program needed to be shine it up. Shine it up. You get that, right? I did that on purpose just to see if everyone was awake. As a result of all of this, I'm here to say to you that I went to the teachers, I went to the administrators, and I said, come to me with a plan that puts honors and teaming in middle schools. If you can't do that, then don't come to me with a recommendation. I talked to the teachers, and I'm suggesting to you tonight that we have teaming in the middle schools, grades 7 to 8, with an honors program that's a part of the teams. And that would be the addition that I would ask for. I'm also here to tell you this evening that we will run teaming in the middle schools without asking you for additional teacher. If we ask for an additional teacher, it will be my responsibility to prove and to show to you that it's based on enrollment or some circumstance we do not know about from a legal perspective with special ed, but it will not be the direct result of us having teaming in the middle schools. If I cannot show you that, then take it away. Then take it away. I should be able to show you why we're getting an additional teacher, and it won't be because of teaming. We have looked at it, we've talked about it, and I agree that honors should be a part of the teaming program. So what I'm asking and what I'm recommending to this board, and what I'm hoping that you will do, is to approve teaming in the middle school with the addition of an honors program, given the parameters that I've addressed. No additional costs, no additional room usage. And if we can't do that, we won't have teaming.
Okay, let's address the subject of teaming first. I think on the last subject, we started over there. I think it's their turn. Yes, let's start on this side. Who'd like to go first? Vicki?
Juan, I thank you for all that research. I had some discussions with Dr. Bond on this. I'd like to say that I will give consideration to your proposal. But I've heard a lot of things talked about with teaming. I hear a lot of it talked about the arguments as to whether or not it's costing us money. Or as Mr. Bowman, when he presented it and the administration presented bringing teaming in, it was actually to save money. When it was to save money, I opposed the program of studies. And it was based on an academic project, academic question that I had as to the individual placement versus the group placement of students. That's an argument that seems to get lost in the discussion, heterogeneous versus homogeneous. As to the teaming being a new concept, as I also discussed with you, we had it here in the district in the late 60s. It went out after a few years. We had teaming in the mid-80s. Again, a new concept coming in that was going to improve the academics of our students. It stayed around for about 4 years. The second phase of teaming was to add more levels into the teaming to make it work better. I was told by past administrators that after 4 years they finally gave up. I won't say that it can't be done. I can't say that there aren't certain social benefits that are obvious in teaming, in that and it depends on the child too as to whether they like it or dislike it. They're together with the same students for all of those teamed curriculum items. And I guess they say that it suits the average child. My question has always been, well, really, you have averages, but where do the averages really exist? Because they are averages. And the diversity of children makes me wonder, well, give me a profile. What is the average child that goes through with the same group of students, be it 25, be it 30, that has been pretty closely matched not only in math, but in science and in English and in the rest of those program of studies, because they all have their strengths, they all have their weaknesses, and in individual placement you work to provide a schedule for them that gives them that. Do we have any empirical evidence, be it from here, be it from there, which actually shows an academic benefit that matches up to the obvious of the social for those who prefer to be confined to the same students?
The answer to that is that we do not in this district. And it's tough to get empirical evidence from an academic standpoint without doing a longitudinal study. And we have not in this district, for whatever reason, had an evaluation tool that did that. We will have one if, in fact, we have teaming, because we need to measure our successes or our needs for improvement. The direct answer to your question is we do not have empirical evidence except for the research research can do just about what we wanted to do either way, so I'm not sure where to go with that. But I will say to you that we're talking about adding a level which is honors. So right now there's a gifted program, there's a level 5 and a level 4. The thing that I heard most from parents was that given what you're saying, that there is no place for the person between gifted and good to be. This honors program is to fill that void. And the other thing that I've challenged the administrators to do is if a youngster is honors in math and science and is not honors in English, that we need to be able to address that.
What do you do about the students that are in the middle, below necessarily the level of exceptionality, except in particular subjects? I think the debate, as we've talked about, a lot of it's been arguing whether it is costing, whether the extra prep time for team studies and all of that it brings an expense. What has had me uncomfortable as to whether or not this is actually more positive for the students academically, or if the focus isn't to deal with the social aspects.
Let me give you a couple academic reasons it's more positive. First of all, you have fewer teachers working with these youngsters so that the teachers get to know the students better, more quickly. The other thing is that because the social studies teacher is working with the English teacher, the social studies teacher now knows some of the things that they can do to help this youngster with their English. And a math teacher is now helping youngsters with their reading. Because these teachers know these youngsters so well, there's a time built in where they're working with these youngsters, and you don't have to teach that subject to give them extra help. Then that extra help is available for the students who are slower and those who move more quickly. One of the concerns I had heard over and over and over again is that we had to provide an opportunity for the youngsters who can move more quickly to do so, to do more in-depth things. And I've given you a descriptor of some of the kind of things that we're talking about doing. And we agree with that. When teaming went in, parents were told that would happen. There's a feeling out there that it didn't, and I could go through reasons why, and I don't know how relevant that is. The piece, the putting the honors back takes care of that, and the principals are going to be held accountable for seeing that happens. The extra help is available. Fewer teachers get to know these youngsters, so I think that's an academic, I really believe that's an academic situation. But we have no empirical evidence to say that what we're doing is better or worse. So that's a tough question.
I just wonder if there was
to
anything,
answer.
because it does have a history. It has a history in the district. It has a history in other school districts. Right. And I will tell you from that history, one thing that I heard, before teaming was actually began here, the experience was that, well, we put it in, we started, it wasn't working out, we added another level, then we added another level, and then we added another level, and then it became so unmanageable that it left, and I see reflections of that even now. Not that I disagree that we do need to do something to accommodate the complaints on honors, but I wonder if history is repeating itself.
Let me tell you what I did.
In a cycle.
Let me tell you what else I did. I went out of the district. I visited other middle schools. I talked to other middle school principals. I talked to Professor at Lehigh, who was supposed to be a guru in middle schools. I did all of that because I had to believe in this. I had to believe in this, and I figured that I needed to go out of the confines of people who have some ownership to do that. Mm-hmm. And they simply confirmed what we were saying here. I've talked to principals who have been doing this for years and would do it no other way. I don't know why we went away from it. I don't know why we do a lot of things that we've done, but I do know this. I do know this, that I've talked, as I said, I've talked to people in and out of this community, in and out of this district. People who don't even, I can't say don't know North Penn because you got to go to the moon for that anymore. But these people couldn't believe that we weren't doing it. So, Vicki, I cannot show empirical evidence.
It's good when it's coming in, and then we hear all the flaws when it's going out, and why something, we return back to a traditional form. I'd like to ask, with the 8th grade being separated from 9th one, as you were looking through, did you find expenses, did you find that there was cost factors due to the need to accommodate separate 8th grade program of studies that were once incorporated and were a part of the combined 8th and 9th grade population at Penndale?
No,
before the switch?
One of the things that we've done is that we have always brought to the board those courses at the 9th grade level, at least, that didn't make it, and they don't run. In Penndale, though, we have accommodated much of that, and this is one of the arguments that some of the Penndale teachers make. To accommodate what you're saying, some of the teachers in Penndale teach 6 periods versus 5, and so that's how we've accommodated that, not having 8th and 9th graders together, rather than to hire extra teachers to do that.
Okay, but traditionally, there were X number of courses where 8th and 9th graders were incorporated.
And when we're back together, that would happen again.
Okay, I posed a question for you when we had our discussion, and perhaps you can answer it. Now, I didn't think it was fair for you to address it at that very moment. But traditionally, if we had 7th, 8th, and 9th on a traditional course of studies, you would have some of these common courses, particularly with the 9th grade, that had various levels, where some 8th graders would be within the same classroom. How do we do that when we have 7th and 8th graders on a teaming concept and 9th graders on an individualized program? How do we bring them back together? Because now we've got 3 locations with 1/3 of the body in 7th grade, 1/3 in 8th grade, and 1/3 in 9th, which would bring even smaller numbers to those programs of study.
I think you're exaggerating the number of 8th graders that were involved in 9th grade courses.
Well, I don't know how many, but now when we're in 3 locations, actually the grade levels are all becoming smaller, and some of those less popular but nonetheless worthwhile courses will have lower 9th grade numbers, as well as the 8th graders perhaps taking them and not being able to be incorporated with each other.
Whether we have teaming or not, we're going to have to make some decisions on whether those courses are going to run for 8th and 9th grade.
But wouldn't they have a better chance if 8th and 9th graders could come together for that classroom?
Yes.
Which will be different.
Yes.
So we could lose courses because of divided enrollment numbers not sustaining the program.
But the courses you're talking about, the 8th graders will be taking, and 8th and 9th graders will be taking, for instance, let's say you have an 8th grader that's taking Algebra 2. Algebra 2 would be a course that 8th and 9th graders take together. See, math becomes an exception for some of the students. So I think you're getting to, if we have Algebra 2 and you're on this 8th grade team, and you have 10 8th graders and 10 9th graders, what do you do with it?
It's going to be complicated scheduling to get them together.
Let me tell you something about scheduling.
I know
Scheduling doesn't dictate what we do. We dictate what scheduling does. Does, boy, what time is it? But scheduling is not going to drive what we do. We're going to drive what scheduling does.
Well, but the flexibility is not there because they're
flexibility,
or else they're not on the team. Is that correct?
They may be on the team for some things and not on the team for others.
Okay. I'm just saying, trying to look at the mechanisms
I understand.
here. 7th, 8th, 9th, 3 grades, maybe 300 per grade. It's going to be difficult on 2 different programs.
Understand, though, that when you have 3 middle schools, you run that same risk if you have the traditional program. If you had Algebra 2 at Penndale for 9th grade, and now you're splitting them by 3, you have the same concerns.
But you move them as an individual, not as a block of students.
We will still be looking at these youngsters for some of the courses as individuals, Vicki. I promise you.
I think that may be necessary in order
I
to
agree
even
with you.
begin to accommodate.
We've said that to them. We don't have a disagreement there.
Do you intend to move this forward to any higher grade levels? Is there any
The only place that we do not have teaming in the secondary school of business right now is at the 9th grade level. And quite frankly, I think our school to work program is a teamed interdisciplinary type program.
Tech prep is a team teaching.
Right. So we have that in 10th and 11th grade. We have it in 7th and 8th grade. We do not have it in 9th grade. And yes, at some point I would love to see that. I didn't bring that into this conversation because, quite frankly, I thought we had enough to do without adding that at this time.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm here with reservations. I'm not committed in one direction or another at this point, just taking in all I've heard. As we move forward with this, I would like to see the positives and the negatives laid out as best you can grab them from input from other districts. I'd also, though, like to see the grade levels that we're talking about. I see where some districts say they've had it, but it has been with the lower grades. Their middle schools are 6th and 7th graders. Well, we've had it with our 6th graders for how many years here? I mean, it was done to help in the adjustment from the elementary to the middle schools. And so grade levels, I worry that we draw down our curriculum and we restrict our offerings.
Mr. Mosey and I had a conversation about that very point. Mr. Mosey said that if you want any hope at all of your liaison supporting this teaming, then don't talk to me and don't let me ever see anything about lowering academic standards. I want to see them raised. And I assured him, as I am assuring you, that that's my goal too. And that's one of the reasons we want teaming. We're not talking about doing less, we're talking about doing more, and breadth and scope of what we do from an academic standpoint. This gives us an opportunity to do some interdisciplinary work, where integrated work gives us an opportunity to do a lot of things differently. But I'm here to tell you, this isn't about fad and this isn't about watering down. Because one of the things that we've learned is through our tech prep and school work initiative, if you expect more, that's what you get. And we're going to expect more of all those levels, the 6-O's, the 5-O's, the 4-O's, teaming or no teaming. And that's a guarantee for me as long as I'm doing what I'm doing.
One final one to clear up everything that may be in everyone's mind.
I appreciate that.
When we go from 8th grade, when the students go from a teaming concept in 8th grade to where there isn't an individual placement, how do they make that adjustment to deciding where they're best placed in the 9th grade curriculum, which does have the various levels? Does it become a trial and error period at a very late stage, or are we okay?
No, it's not. What happens is that teachers make recommendations as to where those youngsters should be. During the school year, those recommendations are shared with parents, and the decision is made where that youngster would best fit in the 9th grade program. And that's another thing that we're going to do better, and that is sharing that kind of information and preparing for the next move with parents.
Having served with the Guidance Review Committee, I certainly, I'm very well aware of the direction to move towards bringing children to a conscious thought about their careers at an earlier age.
Right.
And it did concern me that that period of time that usually takes place in the middle schools, where they get to feel as to really get a handle on their strengths and their weaknesses and where they belong placed by levels, would be occurring at 9th grade, which is a bit late. That's the next step, last step before the high school.
We have a meeting. We have a meeting coming up with all of the counselors in this district, and that's the very topic we're going to be discussing.
Fine-tuning that?
Absolutely. One of the things we've done is we've played everything that you're hearing from me this evening has become a part of things that have already been approved. We've taken a look at the guidance program, see how teaming and school of work fit with the guidance review. We've talked to Dr. Mangano about how things we're going to do will fit into the strategic. We're doing all this at the same time. So your point is well taken, and that's what we're working on.
I appreciate it. At least now I see what's being considered and what possible changes may take place. Thank you. Sorry, Tom.
John? Yes, I have a son who's in teaming, and I like the concept. I mean, there's some good things about it. What concerns me, though, regarding it is the proof that it raises academic standards. That our children are coming away with a better education. Now, I've talked to a few people in the district, and they say that because it's relatively new, they don't have the statistics to support that. My concern is, why can't we go outside
We can.
the district?
I can get that. I can.
I want to see that.
I have that. I've asked. As a matter of fact, when I talked to the professor at Lehigh, I said I needed that information, and that information's that's forthcoming.
Okay.
I just don't have it today.
Okay. I read all the surveys and everything, and I can see there's a lot of complaints regarding communication, coordination. I talked to one parent yesterday regarding the honors. They're saying that their child's coming out of, teaming and going into 9th grade, and it's like a culture shock because, the honors program was taken out. Now I see you're going to implement that back in, which I'm pleased to say. But one thing I really want to say, I would like to see the teaming, how it's now being implemented in our district and results in comparison to the traditional program, if it's possible, side by side. In other words, this was the traditional method, and this is the way we did it, and now we're doing it this way, and we're getting a better result. You know what I mean? I just saw something recently in our packet regarding a proposal software, and I thought he did a fantastic job in putting the pros and cons side by side. And it helped me to really see that, that it is an improvement. So, I really appreciate that if you could do that. And Dr. Bond, I think you're doing a great job. I really believe that you want to implement higher standards in our school, and I would like to see how this teaming concept is working, because the surveys of the parents did concern me a lot, and I was really. It felt like more parents were not really pleased with it. And I know any system, whether it's traditional teaming or whatever, you're always going to have problems with it. And I really believe you're trying to deal with them. So, that's basically my comments.
When I read the survey, one of the things that hit me is I said, I wonder what these surveys would have said, or how different these surveys would have been if we'd have sent them out when we were doing the traditional teaching.
Yeah.
Well, see, we never took a survey before we replaced that. We didn't ask if that was.
And I understand it. I'm a realist, but my point is, I really want to make sure that this concept, along with the proposed solutions to certain problems, are going to be implemented, and that the education of our young people are being, enhanced. That's my concern.
And what I can do is I can get the research from other places and bring that forward, and I can assure you that we will put an evaluation system in place immediately to do exactly what you're saying, so that we will have that empirical, longitudinal information that you're asking for.
I appreciate it.
And we need to do that. We need to do that for any program.
Juan, how about standardized tests? 8th graders were involved in standardized testing. Last year's 8th graders would have taken standardized tests by comparison to the averages that came out of the standardized
The
testing.
thing with standardized testing, I'm not sure it's fair to base it on 1 year. And because you can, if you base it on 1 year, I'm not sure if that's a fair measure. If we take that, Vicki, and compare a lot of things, we can do that. That should be one of the things that we do.
We have last year's 8th graders
John,
and
are you
this year's.
finished?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Vicki, we need to give other board
Go
members a
ahead.
chance. Bill?
All right. Just so we can get focused.
Thank you for all the work you put into this and the research. I really appreciate that, because it's one of those things that we had a lot of questions about. One of the things that concerns me at every level of this district is, as we get bigger and bigger, the students get less and less enfranchised with what's going on. They get lost in the shuffle. And I think I see this as a way of making a small group within a large group, and as classes get larger and larger, they're going to feel part of a smaller group, which I think helps everybody. I was very pleased that, well, one of my concerns was that we're lowering standards of academics, and you seem very confident that that's not happening. And anything we can do to raise the standards, to me, is a positive step in the right direction. I also know that we could all sit here and find faults with everything that's been done, is going to be done. But this seems to have some of the parts in it that seem to me can make for better education for the students. And I would like to see it pursued. Thank you.
Hey, Don.
Yeah, I have a few questions. Regarding the grading, how are the students in the teaming groups graded? Do they have individual grades? That's how they're graded?
Yes. Do you say, do they have individual grades?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, is there a team grade too, I understand?
Why don't we have representatives from the teachers here? Do you mind if I ask one of them to explain that to us? I don't even know who's here. I need a teacher to explain the grading system for teaming, how it works. Anne Louise?
Come to the microphone.
Mrs. Carroll?
Come to the microphone.
Yeah, come on up, if you would, please. I know it's tough, but we've got to get it on the camera.
I'm
Thanks
Ann
for
Louise
coming up.
Carroll.
Thanks for coming up.
You're welcome. I teach at Pembroke, I teach 8th grade, and I teach English, all right? The grading system, as it's always been in the traditional classroom, the students get an English grade, they get a social studies grade, they get a math grade, they get a science grade. In 8th grade, those are the 4 major areas that team together. In 7th grade, you have the additional major of reading, so you have 5 major teachers. There is no team grade.
So that's the only grade they receive is the one, the traditional grade?
Traditional grades.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I was on the board when we went through the teaming episode, and it died. So I approached team teaching with reservation based upon the past results, but time does move on, and I don't want to use that as my final decision maker. But I've heard on the other questions asked, we have to measure results. We have to have some measurement of where we start and where we end to know if this program is doing any good. And one of the things I found previously was that at the end of 1 year, they came and says, well, it's working, but not as well as we want. Let's do it another year. And you do it another year, well, we didn't get what we had last year. We're going to make some changes. It'll be better the next year. I mean, somewhere along the line, I don't know if you have a time plan or a gauge on this. When are you going to decide, if we decide to go ahead with this, is there going to be a measure? Is it going to have to run 5 years or 10 years to see if it works or don't work, or is it going to, how are you going to measure?
I think that what we do immediately is put in an evaluation system, a pre and post testing. And that we be objective and we be fair and we be realistic. And I think that we need a 3-year period to do that. I think we can back up and use some of the statistics we currently have. So I don't think we need a 5 or 10 year. I think that we can, after next year, we can be very concrete in terms of what we feel this is done from an academic standpoint. We just have to do it. I agree with you, Don. We must assess it.
Fine. That's what I want to hear, the 3 years. The other aspect that concerns me, when you get into teams, you have to group, not only grouping students, you're grouping teachers.
Yes.
And some of the comments that I was kind of reading the parents' input, I was getting a feeling that one was talking about one team and one was talking about another team. And I feel you have a bigger risk of how well that group of teachers work together relating one team to another team. Do you see that as a problem of making sure that homogeneous working of a team of teachers they're going to work together as a group? I see that as a problem or a risk.
Juan,
yes.
Before you respond, Art asked me and Ken asked me to make an announcement. Anyone who decides to leave early, the parking lot is very icy, so if you do leave early, please be careful. We'll keep going on with the meeting, but the conditions are getting worse outside. It's misting and icing outside as we speak.
Windshields. May I be excused? I've already lost one car in the last week.
With your permission, I'd like to call Mrs. Miller, who has worked directly with that piece, to the microphone so she can answer that question. Mrs. Miller, the question is there a concern or problem in getting groups of teachers to work cooperatively together? Is that your question?
Yes, essentially.
When we originally put teachers together in teams, we put them in teams based on their strengths and their weaknesses and all of the various teaching styles that they had, and we did the best that we could with that. There's always going to be the risk that a teacher on a group might not work as well with one group as that teacher might with another. And that's certainly something we can examine as we continue with teaming.
My question would be, has that been a concern of significance for you and Mr. Twyford as you've worked with the teams the last 2 years?
No, it's not been a great concern. No.
A corollary to that question is when you work as a team and the team is trying to bring all of these students, as we say, to a higher level, and sometimes we hope this will work or it could fail. When the teacher works as an individual, she has a response. She's measured on how well she teaches that class, and her single responsibility. When she works at a team, can you evaluate the teacher's ability as well, or you get the excuse, well, it's a team, I'm working as part of the team, or?
I can address that. It's both. Where you're working individually in that classroom and how well you're working as a team. It's based on a lot of observations that are made by the principals, and it's also based on feedback you get from students and parents. So the answer to that question is it's both. And the reason that's very important to us is because business and industry is telling us very clearly that these young people need to know how to work as a team, and if the young people are going to do it, we have to create a way for teachers to do it as well. So we're doing both. And we're looking to create different mechanisms to assess that. That's not traditional as well. So the answer to your question is both.
That's all I have, Tom.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Miller. Dr. Miller. Ms. Mayor?
Okay. First of all, I just want to start with a perception I hope that we can eliminate. I'm glad to see that honors is coming back. It never should have been removed, and I'm most bitter that it was, and under the circumstances under which it was at the time, formerly with an older board. But I don't want honors to come back as some sort of a compromise or a bone being thrown to keep team teaching. I guess my loyalties to traditional teaching come from the fact that that is what I benefited from here. I was a beneficiary of that style this district took on at that time. And as you said, Dr. Bond, there's no proof that this is broken. Neither was ability grouping when this was brought in. So there was no proof that traditional teaching in this district was broken when this was brought in. There are a few things that Persing had to say around here that I did pay close attention to. And he made comments and critique of not only this district, but various administrators and various styles, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe I was not the only board member in this room to hear remarks in regards to team teaching, quote, costing more, quote, requires more square footage, i.e. classrooms, and, quote, provided teachers with a extra period, which I believe students are supposed to be the beneficiary of. He felt that a district in space dilemmas and financial dilemmas like ours should not be taking on or maintaining this concept, that traditional was more economical. Are these things true or professionally accurate? I don't know, but it's different from what we heard around here, and I'm most intrigued to know more about that.
Well, let me say it this way, that I would be happy to challenge the good Dr. Persing to a debate on that matter.
I'd love to listen.
I would love to be a part of it. I took a look, and I've listened, and I've heard, and I knew that question was coming up, and I'm telling you, the only thing I could figure out relative to all those teachers is if every teacher in the middle schools taught 6 subjects. The problem with that is that we're not comparing apples to apples because they didn't do that prior to teaming. So to suggest that teaming costs more, what we did with that 6th period, that 6th period was used for things like cafeteria duty, study halls, lunch duty, well, cafeteria and lunch are the same, but a number of administrative duties and assignments. As 8th period, they had to cover for coaches who went to games and some of those kind of things. What we said is that you don't get 6 periods a cycle to do that. 3 of those periods are going to be involved with these youngsters and this teaming process. So we didn't say to them, you're not going to teach a period of English or social studies. We said you're not going to do study hall. You're not, and we reworked that entire system to put the teachers where we felt they would be better serve us, and that's with the students. And quite frankly, the teachers were happier to be with the students during that time than they were doing some of those other things. I don't know where he got his information, and I tell you, I looked for it because I knew it was coming up. Now, for him to suggest that is unfair, and that's as much as I
I'm
think
glad you
I
heard
can
about
say
it
on
before,
that.
so it doesn't sound like a lark, but I know that other people heard
Well, I'm
comments
glad
like
you
that,
asked
and
it.
if they're being researched, I
I'm glad
professionally
you asked.
appreciate it.
If he comes in, I would suggest to you that he would have to answer the same questions that I'm being asked. How does he know that, and what's it mean? You can't just say something. What's it mean? And he never explained that. He just said it.
That's correct. I'm only giving you quotes. We didn't get an explanation, and certainly his time here didn't last long enough to provide it. That extra assignment that is
Yes.
that's allegedly spent with children, is there any sort of, lack of a better word, policing of that to ensure that, in fact, children are getting that time? Is there a daily journal or
Yes,
a log being
we
kept?
have logs. One of the first questions I asked was, now if I'm asked, how do I show what it is you'll be doing? They keep notes and records of what happens during that time. We do the same thing at the high school. We keep journals of that time, because I figured that someday I'm going to have to show you folks that we still need that period. So if you need that, we have that. Okay. We have that. Minutes of those days.
My next comment is probably more of a union problem, but whatever's a union problem eventually becomes our problem this time next year. What percentage of faculty do you have with a 6-period assignment now at the senior high school?
At the senior high school.
Because I know you've really made great movement towards making more 6-period assignments.
25, 30% maybe.
Okay. And we're all well aware of the considerable load elementary school teachers carry in reflection. I guess I see 5 periods and then pretty much a private tutorial one-on-one situation more times than not with kids when we are moving towards a greater use of 6 periods in the high school and elementary teachers who have always been probably more beleaguered than most. And then this group in the middle with a very secure and comfy 5. And I guess I'm concerned about that and just want to place that comment out there that it shouldn't be something that's ignored. And when you look at the whole camp,
when we look at I think that you will find that there are, in all 3 middle schools next year, that there will be teachers who are teaching 6 by necessity.
Okay.
I do want to say, however, that the teachers at the high school that are involved in the Tech Prep Initiative don't teach 6 periods. I mean, to be fair to the middle school, I just need to say that they don't do that at the high school for the same, and they use that period as planning and the same kind of things they do in the middle school. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we monitor that, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that we can show dividends for that. And I understand your point, and we will. Again, the last thing that I want to do is come here and ask you folks for a lot of teachers. I don't want to do that. So we're going to do a lot of homework before that happens, I assure you.
A lot of math. To what extent do bright, more fortunate children have to help out? Do bright or more fortunate students have to help out or be more tolerant, for another lack of a word, with children that are less fortunate in the classroom under this teaming concept? I guess I ask that because I've said before, I've been blessed with children that are very bright. I've been blessed with children that struggle. And I guess I really don't wish, bright children to have to be expected to pick up load at this age. These aren't seniors helping out 10th grader. At this age, to be, quote, helping out the teacher or aiding, being more patient, more tolerant in an academic situation. And I certainly don't want my children who struggle to have to be a tad intimidated by those children who are more fortunate because of this group, this teaming that you have. Okay. Where ability grouping fine-tuned all of that, protected that.
Understand that in the teaming, we still have ability grouping. We've got honors,
right.
We've got college prep,
right.
We've got tech prep.
Right.
Okay, and Mrs. Miller will address that question of topic.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller.
I think, Mrs. Mangle, there might be a confusion between regular classes and what students do in a regular class, and sometimes cooperative learning. Cooperative learning is a strategy the teachers use occasionally. They certainly don't use it every day or very, very frequently, but they use it once in a while. And what happens in that strategy is that students are in small groups, sometimes 3 and 4, and they work together as a unit to do a project. But in everyday classes, for the most part, students are doing what they do similarly in traditional classes. And the brighter students are not called upon to specifically help students who need extra help. Maybe in a lunch study time, when the students are not getting direct instruction, one student might help another student. But that does not happen in the regular classroom.
Okay, well, called upon, I think it was a term I was trying to draw on. I mean, I want my child accelerated, not helping to accommodate another child. I want that relationship to be more student with the teacher, not student with
But I'm not
kids.
aware, Mrs. Mengel, of that to the extent that you are implying. So I have to look into.
Well, maybe
that.
I'm making it more extreme
It's-
from
is it?
just kids or parents that I've listened to.
Okay.
But where more of that can be eliminated.
We will
I think
look at that.
And I think you hear parents saying, I don't want my child being used to help out the classroom. I want the teacher to move my child ahead, not be used as an aide or an assistant, the brighter student.
Okay.
And I guess the survey. Survey was interesting in that it was chock full of comments, but I think the only consistency in the whole survey is the fact that all the teachers basically answered it the same way. And I took that as not a good sign. The comments were all the same. I mean, they were all pretty well on track with the teachers' participation in that survey. And I guess I would have been a little bit more encouraged had teachers added some comments of their own where teaming could be better torqued or better, as opposed to all the answers reading the same from the faculty.
Let me say this about my meetings with the teams. I went to the meetings and I said, no holds barred. I don't want to hear just the good stuff. I want to hear what's happening with teams. Several of the teachers said we need to put honors back in, and that wasn't something that a lot of folks thought would happen. They also suggested that we can do a better job of communicating with parents during that time that we have. There were a number of suggestions they made to improve this concept of teaming, whether it appeared on this or not, because I said, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we can always improve what we're doing, so I don't want to hear how everything is perfect after a year and a half, because it can't be, and it wasn't. And we had many admittance to that, and we've recorded the suggestions that they've made, and we're going to incorporate that into the plan as we move forward with teaming.
I guess in conclusion, I've given this a lot of thought, and basically because of the relationships I feel I have with some of the administrators. I look particularly at you as somebody I've worked with, I think, pretty well for 4 years. I don't know of a bad day we've ever had between us. And as far as the team of Miller and Feely are concerned, I wish they were my principals when I was at Pembroke, because they're exemplary. So I find myself listening more to what you wish because of the personal relationship we've been able to develop in 4 years. But my loyalty has been to traditional teaching. Honors never should have been eliminated. And I'm still grappling with this. I wouldn't make a final decision tonight, but I don't want to kid you as to where I lean.
Let me say to that up until 4 years ago, when we took a look at tech prep at the high school, you're no more traditional than I was. I spent my first 26 years in this business being traditional because I wasn't a faddies person and I didn't believe fads worked. I probably wouldn't be as committed to teaming for the middle schools as I am right now if I hadn't experienced it for myself at the high school. I've watched what's happened with youngsters. I've got documents from youngsters and parents and in terms of how they feel about themselves. And I've had youngsters tell me that they were failing and now they're not because somebody seems to care about them. So I think that the notion that teachers know the youngsters and calls them by name has a lot to do with how they feel about themselves has a lot to do with what they do academically. I don't take this lightly, and in many ways I'm as traditional as anyone else. I believe in this. I believe in this, and I believe in this at a cost that is the same as the cost of traditional education.
Well, I thank all of you that have been working on this. President Clemens, thank you, and to the board, thank you for your patience with all my questions.
Thank you. We'll keep moving right around the table.
Okay,
Ms.
thank you,
Krieger.
Tom. Dr. Bond, I have some general comments that I'd like to make based on personal observations.
Okay.
Conversations that I've had with numerous parents at the middle school level since the beginning of this year. In the discussions that I have had with the parents specifically, I have concluded that teaming appears to be as good as the teachers who are assembled on the team. In the complaints that I have heard, it's about the same team of teachers. In the accolades that I have heard, it's about the same team of teachers. What I'm concerned about as a board member is the lack of teacher accountability with the present team teaching system that we have. In the discussions that have been going around the table this evening, I've already concluded that there appears to be no established academic goals at the present time here in North Penn using team teaching. Is that correct?
There are goals established for each course.
What I'm saying is, were there any identified goals that were going to be established using team teaching that were either not able to be achieved under the traditional methods of teaching?
Let me.
And what I've done, just so I don't want to break this up and drag this on, what I've done, Dr. Baum, is I've made a list of questions that I've asked Ken Weir to copy, which he's on the board, and you will be getting this list of questions. We're not going to be voting on this until the end of February. Is that correct?
The February action.
The end of, okay. So you've got plenty of time to answer my questions. Just to move this along. My biggest thing is teacher accountability, and to make sure that methods are put into place which evaluate the performance of each teacher on a team and the academic success of the students on their team. Okay? I am concerned with what means are currently being used to remediate any type of academic problems that may have already been identified through teaming. I'm also concerned that there are financial ramifications doing teaming versus traditional. It is my understanding that the current contract that we have with our teachers here in the district, and Donnie, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, included a negotiated 6 periods of instruction per day.
No, I don't think.
That is absolutely incorrect.
Is that incorrect?
Absolutely.
Okay, then I was given false information.
Must have been.
Okay, anyway, I want to know what the financial and contractual benefits to this district are with team teaching, if there are any. I'd also, Dr. Bond, in the survey, any time that you have a survey where you identify 3 definitive groups of people, and you have disparity between the responses of 2 and the latter, that you should take note of that and do a little bit more in-depth, take a little bit more in-depth look at the method that you're utilizing. I'd like some justification between the disparity between the 7th and 8th grade teacher responses versus the 9th grade student and 9th grade parent responses. In the survey, which I, by the way, received too, and filled out and promptly sent back, the 9th grade parents were asked to answer 3 more questions than the 7th and 8th grade parents. And those responses are very telling. Those responses, if you combine the no and the not sure responses of the parents, clearly indicates to me as a board member that teaming was not all it was cut out to be for our current 9th grade students. And there is a list of comments galore from the 9th grade students, which identifies to me as a school board member that it really wasn't the best method of instruction for at least our current 9th grade students. So I would like that addressed as well. Mrs. Shear already touched upon the recommendation to create 3 middle schools with 2 grades utilizing team teaching and 9th grade not. I have some major concerns with consistency and continuity in education with that kind of divide. So I'd like some justification on that. And finally, I would like to know as a board member, maybe Dr. Bose can shed some light on this. Since this particular survey has been depersonalized with removing the names of individuals, of teachers and students and what have you. The survey is stamped confidential, Dr. Bose, and I see no need to keep this as a confidential document. I think that the general public and the other parents in our district have a right to see this document, and over the next 4 weeks, evaluate the present method of team teaching at the middle school. Maybe they will take an opportunity to sit down with their students over the next 4 weeks, and talk to them a little bit more about team teaching. I have spent a considerable amount of time talking to my own child, who at the end of 6th grade was recommended to me that because I had identified 5 level courses for her to take this year, that perhaps I was putting her in a very risky position to not be able to achieve the goals for the particular courses that I selected for her. The issues that were given to me as why I should not consider the 5 level courses were her self-esteem, frustration level, things like that. When I knew that my daughter's grade level in her courses throughout 4th, 5th, 6th grade, the years that we've been here, clearly indicated to me as a parent that she could do the 5 level course. She's done a tremendous job this year. So, I see no difference between the traditional method of being able to sign your child up for the course levels you believe that they can achieve and do well in, and the present team teaching methods that we have now as far as course selection. I'd like a little bit of clarity with that. I want to make sure as a parent that that isn't going to change, and that if a teacher recommends one thing but a parent believes another, that the same system of waiving the recommendation can and will be kept in place.
Well, I can assure you that has happened, and will continue to happen.
Okay.
There's no intent to change that.
Okay.
We've talked about that. There's no intent to change that.
Okay. I'm not sold on this, Dr. Bond, and it is your job as the interim director of secondary ed to sell this package to me as a board member. I will tell you that I myself and Mr. Mosey as the other liaison to secondary ed have planned to visit the schools that have team teaching. Up to this point, we haven't been able to coordinate our days very well. So hopefully in the next 4 weeks, we'll be able to do that, take a closer look at it.
Good.
That's all I have at this time. Thank you.
David.
What hasn't been said at this point?
Good night.
There's one word that's come up from a number of people, and that word has been measurement so far. And I believe that's where my biggest concern lies. You're our experts. You're here to recommend programs, to implement those programs, to measure those programs, to measure our students' progress through those programs. We have a lot of people that discuss their feelings about programs with parents, teachers, friends, family, to help them make decisions. Hard facts would go a long way to help us. This survey was an example of that. And I hope that we wouldn't respond to knee-jerk reactions that some people bring and say, we must change this today. We're a year and a half into this program. We've changed from one aspect to teaming. We've eliminated honors. We've said that honors is really there, but it's called something else. Honors is back. Honors is gone. Regardless of the programs that we choose, I believe that we have to look at an overall issue of what is working for us, how do we measure it, what is the progress of our children, and that will go a long way to answer many of the questions that we have about what we call our programs and how we implement them. That is my one and only concern at this point.
Mr. Weiss, that is a concern of mine as well, and will continue to be. I agree.
Well, I have a concern and you have a concern. How do we satisfy our concerns? That to me is the only question. I
We
don't care
measure
if we call it teaming, I don't care.
We measure it.
That's exactly right.
That's how we satisfy.
And we can
measure.
implement this program, we can say that we're going to continue to call it
Some-
teaming, we're going to go back to another approach. We can change programs every 2 years because the board feels like it. But until we measure these things, until we, as an administrative group and as a board group, get together and understand that we are going to implement some type of measurement that gets us hard facts that we can take to ourselves, to our community, that we can take to heart, we're going to go through this constantly.
You won't go through this constantly with me sitting here. Sometime between now and the time you vote, I will bring before you how we're going to measure it. The tools we're going to use, the process we will use to measure what Mrs. Krieger's talking about and what you're talking about. The objectives, how we're doing academically, how the students are doing, that whole piece, we owe that.
That is all I ask for, because again, we can call it anything we want. If we know where we're deficient, we can evolve rather than change, evolution rather than a revolution.
I don't disagree.
Thank you.
Mr. Rose. Last but not least, thank you for remembering what I said to you about our education.
Oh, how could I forget that?
Yeah, all right. See, you told me this morning you were getting old, you couldn't remember things. You did say that. I told you when we left that board members, when we had our meeting back in December, that board members had reservations as well as I do, and I still do, because I, like Mrs. Mayo, am a product of the traditional system. I believe that all our children in the school district should reach their maximum potential. I would like to know, when we have a mixture of, say, a 6, 5, and 4 student in the class, where is the instruction being directed to? Because that was, I read the questionnaires, and that was a concern, that some kids felt that they weren't being challenged, and some said that the instruction was too easy for them. I'm concerned at the fact that our teachers monitoring these students, as in the case of Mrs. Krieger, where her child was, she wanted to move the child up, and she actually had some difficulty to get the teacher to agree with her to do that. I feel that sometimes if you put a 6 and a 5 and a 4, I think there's going to be frustration, unless we are gearing the instruction, to all 3 levels. You mentioned the fact that students are not helping other students. In one of your questionnaires, I think it was mentioned once or twice, that was a complaint of a couple of students, that they are asked to help. I read the survey differently, and I ran some numbers, but I'm not going to get into it. I found it to be those that approve and those that disapprove, parents and students, and I threw out the responses that were just ridiculous. I mean, some of them didn't address the question. But I found that the most disapproved, but the numbers were close. And I remember last year when the team teaching came up at one of the board meetings, and Dr. Fike said, well, it hasn't been in effect that long, give it a chance, and so forth. I would like to see some sort of a measurement where we are. He said it's a year, we're a year and a half down the road, as David said. We should have some kind of an idea where we're going with this thing, if it's succeeding or if it isn't succeeding.
I said to Mr. Hill that we were going to go back to the beginning of this and take a look at some of the criteria we had at that time, some of the grades, some of the statistics we had, and bring that forward. So we're going to, that's something that we plan.
You remember in our conversation, I said to you, and you said to me, I promise you it's going to work. And I said to you, I have a problem with it, because to me, I think the 2 systems oppose each other. I think team teaching and honors are I just think one is a grouping type, a traditional type of education, and of course the other one being team teaching. But again, you said it'll work. My concern is that it does work, that you don't have frustration at any of the levels. They are all reaching their maximum. If they're going along at the same rate of speed, and they're all accomplishing at the same rate of accomplishment, and it was stated, again, in one of the questionnaires by the students, the fact that I like it because we're all progressing together. Well, then, to me, someone's underachieving. If you have a 6, a 5, and a 4, and they're all going along at the same rate, then someone's underachieving. It's in the question. I only mention that because I read that in the questionnaire. It turned.
Twice you've mentioned the 6, 5, 4 in the same.
Well, it's an example. Let's go 6, 5, G, 5, 4. I'm just saying we're going to have, the whole purpose of teaming is that we have a cross-section. That we have, and you explained it to me, you felt the children weren't being challenged enough. And you said to me that if you have a G, a 5, and a 4, it was 2 Gs and 2 gifted children, 2 5s and 2 4s or whatever. You said that you feel that they will want to move up, that they will interact, and they will want to be challenged, and they will want to succeed.
But they're in their same classroom together in a team.
Right.
Now the 6s. The honor students would be on a team, but all the 6s would be in the same classroom.
So they're being grouped?
Well, they're being grouped then?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure, all your gifted are grouped together. Now your 6s will be your honors, then your 5s are your academic.
Well, you showed me a chart that showed a team, and there was 5 or 6 kids on the team.
No. That was I apologize. That was a level, not a number of students. What I showed you, and I have a copy of it here. Ken's going to get an overhead, and I'll show you. On a team. Ken was going to the men's room.
He even asked permission.
How can you just leave and go to the men's room? It's not 11:30 yet. You can't go to the men's room till 11:30.
You said to me at Pembroke there would be 2 teams, for example. There would be 2 6s, a 5, and 2 4s, or 2 5s, and a 4. I assumed that was one team.
It is.
And those kids would all be working together.
No. The thing is that they have just 5 teachers, but you have a group, a 6-0 group stays together as a 6-0 group for those 5 subjects that are listed here. A group of 5-0 students stay in their group for the 5 subjects we have here, and a group of 4-0 students stay in their group. There's 6, 5s, and 4s aren't in the same classroom except for many of the exploratory programs, but not for the 5 academic subjects or 4.
Then why did you list it that way on the chart you gave me?
No, I didn't explain the chart well enough, because I have the chart here, and that's not what I said. That's not what I meant to say.
Okay, because that's what I understood you to say.
Okay, well, I didn't explain it.
That's where my concern.
No, I didn't explain it well, and that's why I was confused when you said 6, 5, and 4 is in the same group.
Well, because that's the chart and you explained to me that this is one team, and I saw the breakdown of the different levels.
Let me
and that's where my concern came.
Well, we get the overhead, I'll share the chart. I have it, or we can do that in another time.
Yeah, we can do it.
Go over it, just do it one more time with the new honors. You have 5% are gifted. Would you Dr. Bond, can you break it down by the percentages? It's like 5%, we went through this before, is G. Then there's so many percent, that'll be 6. So many, how does it work?
Use the bullet, use the chart.
I'll do that. I'll tell you what. Why don't I have Mr. Twyford do that for me? Come on up here. Thank you, sir. The day's here, it's 11:20.
He likes being a cabinet member, you see that?
Work session.
On each of our teams.
No, Mr. Twyford, announce your name and address and come to the board. All I want you to do is just chart on the board. Okay.
I have to say my name.
Yeah. Go.
Jeff Twyford, Principal Penfield.
Good.
For the viewing audience, we ought to announce it's 11:20 p.m. so they can understand why we're arguing.
I have my sheet now.
See this at 7 p.m.
This one here?
That's when it's happening.
That's all right. We'll make it. Is there a better? I gotta think about it.
Sure. I may be back.
Do you have markers?
I guess, what can we grab?
Gotta go.
study itself, I just think the balance.
packet for tonight?
I'm not sure.
I don't think it is. I got it in my packet.
Okay.
I think it's right here.
This is what it is.
Yeah, I have it. But see,
There it is. Right there. There it is. Now, the audience does not have this, right?
No.
I had it, and I fully understood it.
Mr. Clemens, is this material going to be on the test?
Definitely.
I think that we can do this quickly.
You know, you don't have to,
I think we
No,
can do this very, very quickly. What happens is that if you have, you could have on a team 3 groups of 6-0 students and 2 groups of 5-0. 6-0 being honors, 5-0 being college prep. Those youngsters would stay together for the academic courses mentioned on that document. They would share with one another for many of the exploratory programs, health, phys ed, tech ed, some of those courses.
Right.
The misunderstanding came into place because I had 6, 5, and 4, and somehow the understanding was that those 6s, 5, and 4s commingle for all of the courses.
That's the way I
That's a
understood it.
misunderstanding, and I apologize for that, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that is, no, thank you, Mr. Twyford, you did great. But that's important, you did great. Leave it at that. That's important because both of you misunderstood that. So I'm glad it came up.
well, since it did came up, and this will be my last comment tonight on this, I
You
promise.
has already lost a bet in the back fin dinner.
Sorry.
Working on breakfast, aren't we, Judy?
We are. There's always breakfast at Debbie's.
I saw
Dr.
Dottie
Brown.
Harbour here. Owen, we need her.
With Penndale next year, bigger school, more teams. I want to make sure that if this is something that this board is inclined to do, that every team has every course level on the team, so that we do not have any teams that do not have children who are in 4-level courses on their team, children who are 5-level courses on their team, and children who are in 6, or, however you're going to do that. I just did not like the example here that you gave for one particular team that clearly indicated that the gifted students and the higher academic track students
We're the only ones on the team.
were the only ones on the team. I think that
We will
that's
take a look at
stretching
that.
it a little.
We will take a look at that. We will take a look at that.
That's my last comment, Tom.
We will take.
But we're going fast. Great.
Well, I guess I should have told you that.
Hey, no problem, I'm married, I'm used to it. I don't run my house, I can tell you. The only thing I say is I agree with Mrs. Mingo. I'm still on the fence with it. I told you that when we had our meeting, that, I'm still not convinced, but we have some time to think about it, so.
Dr. Boone, can I ask one quick question here?
Comment.
Vicki, go ahead, Bill, and then we'll come to Vicki.
One of the things that I've noticed in listening here, that we're listening to a lot of, I'll use the word complaints, but I don't want to say it in a derogatory way, but complaints, concerns that really aren't involved with team teaching. It's just general complaints that my teacher doesn't communicate enough with the parent. Well, that has nothing to do with team teaching. It's a problem with a teacher or a parent or student not taking notes on it. But I think we're making this team teaching into this huge monolithic monster that's taking over, and everything that went wrong last year we're blaming on team teaching. We should be looking at some of the good things it does and kind of taking out particular problems of scheduling or certain teachers only have the 6-0 and 5-0 kids. Well, that can happen in any situation. Let's not blame everything that we see as wrong or any complaint we've had just as a product of team teaching and therefore throw it all out. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Vaughn, I do have a question for you, and I can understand Bill's right in a way, and I think that Pat said that he certainly, some of those were unrelated. But when team teaching is being held up to address specific problems, and that one of the big awards that comes from team teaching is greater communication, and you see that coming through as a negative, you know that there's one of your objectives not being reached. And so those are ones that we have to really dissect and look and see, well, is this supposed to be one of the attributes of this program that we're going to, that's driving the team teaching? If that's not there, then it is relevant. I'd like to know, since we begin with team teaching in 6th grade, and it goes through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we put in these course levels that we have, 4, 5, and 6, or whatever we're going to have. I don't know whether we're going to rearrange these numbers, whether it's going to be 4, 5, 6, and 7, however you're doing it, your levels. What is the process that is used to assign the students to these levels on the teams, given the fact that they're 11 years old and are involved in team teaching and grouped? How do we, as they move through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, peg them?
The same process is used to move these youngsters and the teams that is used to move these youngsters into traditional courses. Teacher recommendation, test scores, parent conferences. That's how we recommend youngsters to go into traditional math and traditional science. Is the same thing we do, because we're sending them into a level. And then once those things are decided, then the teams are put together. But the teams are put together after youngsters are put into these various levels.
But when they're locked in for this set level with so many different disciplines, how do you determine their level? In other words, when we have our ability grouping of math here and your reading here, with the math, if they've been placed in there, they're specific for math. You know that's for math. You're not carrying that over to their abilities in science or English. But doesn't it get hard when?
It does get hard.
And I'm wondering, especially when they're going through the periods of 11th, 12th, 13th years old, how do we make sure we're blocking them?
It gets hard, but it doesn't get any. It gets hard when we do that traditionally, because some of the youngsters need a 6.0 science course, but they need a 5.0 or 4.0 English, and matching those youngsters up in the traditional schedule is difficult. That is difficult, and we've worked on that. We will continue to work on that. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to suggest that there are no flaws in this program of teaming, but I am here to suggest that there are flaws in no matter what program. Scheduling is a difficult process regardless as to what we do. It's made more difficult with teaming, but that just gives us an additional challenge. What I would like to do is I'd like to take the concerns that you've expressed. I'd like to share those concerns with the people I need to share them with in and out of this community. Because some of the concerns you expressed, I need to go to additional sources to get some information for you. I'd like to have an opportunity to bring all of that back to this group and answer the questions that you've raised for me. I'm not prepared to answer many of those questions tonight, which is one of the reasons we brought it to a work session. So I'm prepared to get those answers that you and all of you raised. And that's the responsibility that I have to you. And that's a responsibility I'm going to share with many of the people sitting in this audience. Because I can't do that by myself, and I don't claim to be the know-it-all on this team. So I promise you that we've taken notes and we have this cameras, and we will address all of those questions for you.
Mr. Clemens, can I ask a question in regards? I just want to ask a question in regards.
And then we're going to wrap it up. Go ahead, Sharice. I'll allow your question, but it's time to wrap up this subject.
I just want to know, based on Dr. Bond's closing comments now, is what he's talking about bringing back to us, is he talking about bringing back to us further information at the February work session, or are we supposed to wait until the February action meeting? Because I would really not like to debate the merits or further discuss the merits of whether or not to do teaming at the action meeting. I would like to be able to come in
it won't
and decide
happen
that
at the
night.
action meeting. If clearly, we need to discuss this at another work session.
Right.
Clearly, I said tonight that the topics we talked about tonight will not be voted on Thursday night.
No, I know
Okay.
that. I'm talking about February.
Clearly, Juan has his marching orders from the board that he needs to come back with more answers. I feel confident that we need to discuss it at the February work session. I also feel confident that Dr. Bond could bring us back answers before the work session, that we could start that process of asking those questions on the phone and personally coming down here on the questions that we have. At this time, as board president, I certainly sensed, and I told Dr. Bond this before the meeting tonight, that I did not sense that there's absolute support from this board for team teaching. There are more questions, there are people sitting on the fence on the issue, and the more answers, that he needs to come back with more answers. One thing that I would like to ask Tawan, since I didn't even go yet.
Is what?
I didn't even get to go yet, ask you questions. Just real quickly, on the survey, back to, I think Mrs. Krieger asked the question. Judy, that is marked confidential, but why can't we make that available for the public?
We can.
We can, that's not a problem.
Okay, so we should do that. Also, while we're on that survey, when I read the teachers' responses, I was surprised that there wasn't at least one teacher who was opposed, is this response saying that all of there's not one teacher out there in the middle schools that are for traditional and not for teaming?
This was recorded exactly as we got it back. That's exactly what you got is exactly what we got.
Okay.
They're the responses.
I heard.
Take time.
I heard that I needed.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How much time do you have on your tapes?
How much time do you have?
5 minutes?
Okay.
I don't need 5. I heard that there were teachers unhappy with teaming. I went to each school and I offered an opportunity for folks to tell me that. I said, you've got to tell me that because I don't want to go into this meeting and find out there are folks that are saying something different. And I said, do you represent your group in this, and the 6 or 7 or 10 folks that I had there said yes. I got the same response you did when I spoke to them privately.
Okay. It is 11:30. I know there are many people out there who want to talk boundaries tonight. Starting at 10:30, our custodian started to make us aware that the parking lot's a sheet of ice. Then Art Wood came to make me aware that the parking lot sheet of ice is getting worse. David White's just came to me and said that he was personally out there and he recommends that we stop the meeting because of the safety of all of you people to get home. I now, as board president, have to make a decision whether I'm going to have unhappy people out there that we haven't got to get to the boundaries. But I do believe that 3 respected people in this area have made a recommendation to me that we should stop this meeting. Therefore, I'm going to stop this meeting. Not going to allow comments from the public, but I do feel that I owe the public an explanation on the one part that I'm going to, as quickly as I can, wrap up as to where we are in boundaries. I need to and I really haven't had a chance to talk too much tonight, so I'm going to expand a little bit on boundaries, and then I'm going to call for an adjournment of the meeting that we will reconvene at our work session in February to be discussing the boundaries, the program of studies, the teaming, and whatever else we talked about. We're just gonna rehash it again at the February meeting.
Tom, boundaries should be first on that agenda.
What's that?
Boundaries should be first on the agenda.
Boundaries will be first on that agenda. Yes, they will.
There has been no audience of citizens relative to this topic.
And we need to have an audience of citizens. I agree with that. But I can't have comments from the public.
I'm not asking for a comment. I just wondered if it would be possible to add a few minutes onto the action meeting for some comments. Prior, that might give Dr. Bond some other clues about what people are interested in hearing about.
At the action meeting, ma'am, people can bring up anything they want anyway.
Okay.
So that'll work. Right.
Thank you.
Okay, but I'd just like to tell the group, as far as boundaries go, as a board member, I received the boundaries proposal. Bear with me for one moment. And I know all the board members did. And at this time, I would also like to make an announcement that there was an executive session on January 4th. That's a Thursday night. We talked about personnel issues and we talked about land issues. But that night, January 4th, was when I received as a board member my first copy of what the boundaries would look like. Pat Mosey wanted it distributed to the board members ahead of time. Our packet normally goes out on the 5th. That weekend, I believe, is when we had the big storm. How can we all forget? The week of the 8th, school was closed. I did have an opportunity to talk to Dr. Bond, and I knew that I had 5 other board members' support that what the boundaries looked like, that there were 5 other board members that were willing to look at what an alternative plan would look like. And as far as our board policy states, if there are 5 board members that agree to that, that can be added to the agenda. It was not a decision made on my own. It was a decision in part with 5 other board members. That is why I know there are many people from the committee tonight who are here who did meet with Dr. Bond today, and I know there were comments made about why at the last minute. It wasn't at the last minute. If you clearly heard me, I did not receive this until the 4th. And the other part of it is that there are 5 board members who wanted to look at an alternative plan. That is why tonight there's an alternative plan. As far as this board president's concerned, when we discuss the boundaries in the February meeting, these will be the only 2 plans that we will discuss. In saying that, I'll ask for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Mengel.
Second.
Second by Mr. Schilling. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.